Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been doing this job for 32 years now, and I can tell you that most calls blend together after a while. Domestic disputes, fender benders, kids spray painting walls behind the grocery store. But the hang-ups, those are different. The ones where someone dials 911 and then says nothing, where the line stays open just long enough for you to hear breathing, or background noise, or sometimes just that heavy silence that makes your skin crawl. Those calls, they stick with you. They follow you home. They wake you up at 3 in the morning wondering if you did enough. If you got there in time, if what you found was really what happened. The first one I remember clearly came in on a Tuesday night in October. I was maybe 5 years on the force then. Still thought I knew how the world worked. The dispatcher, Maria, she'd been doing this longer than any of us, and when she came over the radio, her voice had this edge to it. Unit 47, we've got a hang-up at 1823 Sycamore Street. Caller didn't respond to callback attempts, but the line stayed open for about 4 minutes. We could hear what sounded like a television in the background, maybe some movement. I acknowledged and headed over. Sycamore Street was in the older part of town, where the houses sat close together and the streetlights threw long shadows that seemed to move even when there was no wind. Number 1823 was a 2-story house with white aluminum siding that had seen better days. The porch light was on, and I could see a blue glow coming from what looked like a living room window. Television, probably. I parked the cruiser and walked up the front steps. The wood creaked under my boots, and I noticed the doorbell was hanging loose from its mounting. I knocked instead. Police department, we received a call from this address. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Hello? Police department? I could hear the television clearly now. It was loud, maybe too loud for this time of night. Sounded like one of those late-night movies, the kind with lots of dialogue and dramatic music. But no footsteps, no sounds of someone getting up to answer the door. I walked around to the side of the house. The living room window was partially open, maybe 3 inches. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap where I could see inside. An older man, maybe 65, was sitting in a recliner facing the television. He wasn't moving. His head was tilted back slightly, like he'd fallen asleep watching TV. I tapped on the window. "Sir, police department?" He didn't react. I tapped again, louder, still nothing. I went back to the front door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. I called out as I entered. "Police department, we received a call from this address. Sir, are you okay?" The smell hit me first. Not death, nothing that dramatic, just staleness. Like air that had been trapped in a closed room for too long. The television was incredibly loud now that I was inside. Some old Western movie, lots of gunshots and horses galloping. I walked into the living room. The man was exactly where I'd seen him from the window. Gray hair, wearing a white undershirt and dark pants. His eyes were closed, and for a moment I thought he was just sleeping. Closer, I could see he was breathing. Slow, regular breaths, like he was in a deep sleep. "Sir?" I said, louder now to be heard over the television. "Sir, can you hear me?" He didn't respond. I reached over and turned down the volume on the TV. The sudden quiet was almost more unsettling than the noise had been. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere in the house, and what sounded like a refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I shook the man's shoulder gently. "Sir, police department. Are you all right?" His eyes opened slowly. They were brown and completely clear, not confused, not disoriented, just aware. He looked at me for a long moment, then sat up straighter in his chair. "Officer," he said. His voice was steady, normal. "Is there a problem?" "We received a 911 call from this address about 20 minutes ago. Did you call us?" He looked genuinely confused. "A 911 call? No, I haven't called anyone." I looked around the room. It was neat, clean. Family photos on the mantel. A newspaper folded on the coffee table. Everything looked normal. "Are you sure?" The call came from this phone number. He followed my gaze to the phone sitting on a small table next to his chair. It was one of those old rotary phones, the kind you don't see much anymore. Black, with a coiled cord that connected the handset to the base. "I've been sitting here all evening," he said. "Watching television. I haven't used the phone." "Have you been asleep? Maybe you made a call and don't remember?" He shook his head. "No, I don't sleep in this chair, just watching my programs." I asked him his name. Harold Vance. He lived in the house for 43 years, ever since he got married. His wife had died 6 years ago, and now he lived alone. No health problems, no medications that would affect his memory. Just a retired postal worker who spent his evenings watching television. "Mr. Vance, is there anyone else who might have access to your phone? A family member, maybe a neighbor?" "No, nobody else has keys, and I don't get many visitors." I walked through the rest of the house. Kitchen, dining room, upstairs bedrooms. Everything was neat and orderly. No signs of forced entry. No evidence that anyone else had been there. The phone in the kitchen was a newer model, push button, but it was connected to the same line as the rotary phone in the living room. When I came back downstairs, Mr. Vance was watching television again. I sat down on the couch across from him. "Mr. Vance, I need to ask you again about that phone call. Our dispatcher heard the line open for several minutes. She could hear the television, just like I can hear it now. But someone had to dial 911. He muted the television and looked at me. "Officer, I understand you're just doing your job, but I'm telling you the truth. I haven't used that phone all day." There was something in his voice, though. Not exactly lying, but something. Like he was leaving something out. "Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything unusual that's happened recently?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Well, there is one thing. Probably nothing, but what is it?" "The phone's been ringing more lately. Usually late at night after I've gone to bed. But when I answer it, nobody's there. Just silence." "How often does this happen?" "Maybe 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more." "Do you have caller ID?" He shook his head. "Never saw the need for it." I made a note in my report book. "Mr. Vance, if this happens again, don't answer the phone. Let it ring. And if you do answer and there's no one there, hang up immediately and call us." He nodded. "I can do that." I was about to leave when I heard it, very faint, coming from the kitchen, the sound of a phone ringing. Not the loud, metallic ring of the rotary phone in the living room. Something softer, more modern. Mr. Vance heard it too. He looked confused. That's not possible. I only have the 2 phones and they're both right here." I walked into the kitchen. The ringing was definitely coming from in there, but I couldn't see another phone. I opened cabinets, looked under the table. Nothing. But the ringing continued, soft and insistent. Then I found it. In the drawer, next to the sink, underneath some dish towels, a small, cordless phone. The kind you might buy at a grocery store for $20. It was ringing, the display showing an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. I picked it up and answered. Hello? Silence, but not empty silence. I could hear something in the background. Breathing, maybe, or just the sound of an open line. Hello? I said again. The line went dead. I looked at Mr. Vance, who was standing in the kitchen doorway. His face was white. "I've never seen that phone before," he said. "I don't know where it came from." I checked the phone. It was a basic model. No stored numbers, no call history. But it was fully charged, like it had been plugged in recently. "Mr. Vance, this phone had to come from somewhere. Are you sure you didn't buy it? Maybe you forgot?" He shook his head vigorously. "No, I would remember. I don't need another phone. The two I have work fine." I looked at the phone again. There was no serial number, no manufacturer's label. Just a plain black cordless phone that shouldn't have been there. "I'm going to take this with me," I said. "Evidence?" He nodded. "Of course. But officer, I want you to know, I'm not losing my mind. I've never seen that phone before tonight." I believed him. There was something about the way he said it, the confusion in his voice. He wasn't lying. I bagged the phone and headed back to the station, filed a report, tagged the evidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The timing was too convenient. A 911 hang-up call, and then we find a mysterious phone in the house that the owner claims he's never seen before. I ran the serial number from the phone, but it came back as unregistered. Contacted the manufacturer, but they had no record of it. It was like the phone had just appeared out of nowhere. 3 days later, we got another hang-up call from the same address. This time, I was off duty, but I asked Rodriguez to check on it. He found Mr. Vance sitting in his chair, watching television. Everything normal, no sign of distress. But when Rodriguez asked about the phone call, Mr. Vance said the same thing as before. He hadn't called anyone. The calls kept coming. Every few days, sometimes more often. Always the same pattern. The line would stay open for a few minutes, the dispatcher would hear the sound of television in the background, and then it would go dead. And every time we sent someone to check, Mr. Vance would be sitting in his chair, watching TV, claiming he hadn't made any calls. The fourth time it happened, I decided to wait outside the house. I parked across the street and watched the windows. The call came in at 11:47 p.m., right on schedule. I could see the blue glow of the television in the living room window, and I could make out Mr. Vance's silhouette in his chair. But I also saw something else. A shadow moving past the kitchen window. Just for a second, but it was definitely there. Someone else was in the house. I called for backup and approached the front door. It was unlocked, like always. I went inside, weapon drawn. Mr. Vance was in his chair, watching television. He looked up when I entered, but he didn't seem surprised to see me. "Evening, officer," he said. "Let me guess. Another phone call?" I nodded. "Mr. Vance, is there anyone else in the house with you?" "No, just me. Same as always." I searched the house again. Every room, every closet, even the basement. Nothing. No sign that anyone else had been there. But I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been moving around in the kitchen. When I came back to the living room, Mr. Vance was still watching TV. He looked tired, older than he had when I first met him. "Find anything?" he asked. "Number?" "But Mr. Vance, I saw someone in your kitchen, a shadow moving past the window." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Officer, can I tell you something?" Something I probably should have mentioned before. Of course. My wife, before she died, she used to walk around the house at night. Couldn't sleep, you know. The medication made her restless. She'd get up and check the doors, make sure everything was locked. Sometimes she'd go to the kitchen and make tea. I sat down on the couch. "Mr. Vance, your wife died 6 years ago. I know that. But sometimes late at night I still hear her walking around. Footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. I know it's not possible, but... He trailed off, staring at the television. But what? But maybe she's trying to tell me something. Maybe that's why the phone calls started. I didn't know what to say to that. In 30 years of police work, I'd heard a lot of strange stories. People claiming to see things, hear things that weren't there. Usually, it was grief or medication, or just loneliness playing tricks on their minds. But the phone calls were real. The mysterious cordless phone was real, and I'd seen the shadow in the kitchen window. Mr. Vance, have you considered that maybe you're making these calls yourself? Maybe you're doing it without realizing it? He looked at me with those clear brown eyes. Officer, I've considered that, but I'm not losing my mind. I know the difference between what's real and what's not. The next call came in 2 days later. This time, I didn't wait for backup. I went straight to the house, used my key. Mr. Vance had given me one after the third incident, and let myself in. The living room was empty. The television was on, but the chair was vacant. I could hear something in the kitchen. Not footsteps exactly, more like rustling, like someone going through papers. I drew my weapon and moved slowly toward the kitchen. The sound stopped as soon as I entered the room. Mr. Vance was standing at the counter, his back to me. He was holding the cordless phone, the one I'd taken as evidence, the one that should have been locked up at the station. Mr. Vance? He turned around slowly. His face was different somehow. Not confused, not disoriented, just empty, like he was looking right through me. She wanted me to call, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. She said it was important. Mr. Vance, where did you get that phone? He looked down at it, like he was seeing it for the first time. I don't know. It was just here. I reached for the phone, but he pulled it back. No, she needs it. She's trying to tell me something. Mr. Vance, I need you to give me the phone and sit down. He shook his head. You don't understand. She's been trying to reach me for years, but I couldn't hear her until now. The phone in his hand started ringing. That same soft, insistent tone I'd heard before. Mr. Vance looked at me, then at the phone. I have to answer it, he said. No, don't. But he was already pressing the answer button. He held the phone to his ear. Hello? He said. Then his face changed. The emptiness was replaced by something else. Recognition, relief, maybe even joy. Margaret, is that you? He listened for a moment, nodding. I couldn't hear what was being said on the other end, but I could see the effect it was having on him. His whole body seemed to relax. I know, he said. I've been waiting, but I didn't know how to find you. He listened again, then looked at me. She says she's been trying to call for a long time, but the connection was bad. She couldn't get through. I reached for the phone again, but he moved away. She says she's ready now. She's been waiting for me to be ready too. Mr. Vance, please give me the phone. He shook his head. She says it's time. She's been alone too long. The conversation continued for several minutes. I could only hear Mr. Vance's side of it, but it was clear he was talking to someone he believed was his dead wife. His voice was soft, loving. The voice of a man who'd been lonely for a very long time. Finally, he hung up the phone and set it on the counter. She says she'll wait for me, he said, but not much longer. 3 days later, the neighbor found him. Harold Vance, sitting in his chair, watching television. He'd died peacefully in his sleep, the coroner said. Natural causes. His heart had just stopped. But when I went to process the scene, I found something that still bothers me. The cordless phone was back in the kitchen drawer, exactly where I'd found it the first time. But according to the evidence log, it should have been locked up at the station. I checked with the desk sergeant. The phone was still there in the evidence locker. Same serial number, same everything. But somehow, there was an identical phone in Mr. Vance's kitchen. I never did figure out how that was possible. But I'll tell you what I think happened. I think Harold Vance was a lonely old man who missed his wife so much that he found a way to reach her. And I think she found a way to reach back. The calls stopped after he died. The house was sold to a young couple with 2 kids. They never reported any problems with the phones. No mysterious calls, no hanging up, no voices in the night. But sometimes when I drive past that house, I think about Harold Vance sitting in his chair, waiting for the phone to ring. And I wonder if love is strong enough to survive death, strong enough to find a way back across whatever distance separates the living from the dead. That was the first case that really got to me. The first time I realized that some things can't be explained, can't be filed away in a report and forgotten. Some things follow you home and make you question everything you thought you knew about how the world works. But it wasn't the last. Over the years, I've responded to dozens of hang-up calls. Most of them are nothing. Wrong numbers, kids playing pranks, people who dial 911 by mistake and hang up when they realize what they've done. But a few of them are different. The second case that stays with me happened about 8 months after Harold Vance died. By then, I'd started to dread the hang-up calls. Every time Maria's voice came over the radio with that particular tone, the one she used when something felt off, my stomach would tighten up. This one came in on a Thursday night around 1:30 a.m. The caller had stayed on the line for nearly 6 minutes, and Maria said she could hear what sounded like a child talking in the background. Very quiet, almost whispering. The address was 412 Elm Street, in the Riverside section of town. It was one of those neighborhoods that had been nice once, back in the 50s maybe. But now the houses were showing their age, and the families that could afford to move somewhere better had already gone. I knew the area well enough. We got calls there regularly, domestic disputes mostly, sometimes drug-related stuff, nothing too serious but enough to keep us busy. 412 Elm was a small ranch house with brown siding and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. Most of the houses on the street were dark, but this one had lights on in what looked like the living room and maybe a back bedroom. I could see a car in the driveway, an older sedan that had seen better days. Everything looked normal enough, but there was something about the way the light fell from the windows that bothered me. Too bright, maybe, like every bulb in the house was turned on. I parked the cruiser and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, I heard voices inside, a woman talking, and what sounded like a child responding. The conversation was too muffled to make out words, but the rhythm was wrong somehow. The woman would say something, and then there'd be a long pause before the child answered. Too long, like the kid was thinking very carefully about what to say. I knocked on the door. The voices stopped immediately. Police department. We received a call from this address. Footsteps, but slow ones. Someone walking carefully like they were trying to be quiet. Then a woman's voice, very close to the door. We didn't call anyone. Ma'am, we got a 911 call from this number about 15 minutes ago. I just need to make sure everyone's okay. Another long pause. I could hear whispering, but I couldn't tell if it was the woman talking to someone else or just talking to herself. We're fine, she said finally. It must have been a mistake. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open the door so I can verify that everyone's safe. I can't do that right now. Why not? Because my daughter's sleeping. If I open the door, the light will wake her up. I looked around. The porch light was on, and so were the lights inside the house. If the kid was sleeping, she was doing it with every light in the place turned on. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Susan Chen." "And your daughter's name?" A pause. "Katie, how old is Katie?" She's 7. Something in her voice made me take a step back from the door. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. Like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Miss Chen, I'm going to need you to open the door. This will just take a minute. I told you, she's sleeping. If you wake her up, she gets upset. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we received a 911 call from this address. It's procedure for me to verify that everyone's safe." I heard whispering again, definitely the woman talking to someone. But the voice that answered back didn't sound like a 7-year-old child. It was too quiet, too careful, like an adult trying to sound like a kid. "Miss Chen, is there an adult male in the house with you?" "No, just me and Katie." "Are you sure?" I thought I heard another voice. "No, just us. Sometimes Katie talks in her sleep." I walked around to the side of the house. There were windows facing the neighbor's yard, and one of them had the curtains pulled back just enough for me to see inside. The living room was empty, but I could see into part of the kitchen. A woman was standing near the counter, talking to someone I couldn't see. She was maybe 35, with dark hair and wearing a bathrobe. She looked nervous, kept glancing toward the front of the house like she was waiting for something to happen. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I could hear the conversation through the partially open window. The woman's voice was soft, urgent. "You have to be quiet. If he hears you talking, he'll know." The voice that answered was definitely a child, but there was something wrong with it. The words were too precise, too carefully pronounced. "I understand. I'll be good. Remember what we practiced. If he asks you questions, what do you say?" "I say I'm 7 years old and my name is Katie." "And if he asks about Daddy?" "I say Daddy doesn't live here anymore." I felt my hand move toward my radio, but something stopped me. This didn't sound like a domestic situation or a kidnapping. It sounded like a mother coaching her child to lie to the police. But why? I went back to the front door and knocked again. "Miss Chen, I'm going to need you to open the door now." "Please, officer, can't you just go away?" "We're not in any trouble. We didn't call you." "Ma'am, someone called 911 from this number. That's a fact. Whether you remember making the call or not, I have to follow up." I heard more whispering, and then the sound of a chain being removed from the door. It opened about 4 inches, held by what looked like a security latch. The woman's face appeared in the gap. She was younger than I'd thought from her voice, maybe late 20s. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes kept darting past me, scanning the street like she was looking for someone. "See, we're fine. No problems here." "Miss Chen, I need to see your daughter, just to verify that she's okay." "She's sleeping. I told you, if you wake her up..." "I won't wake her up. I just need to see that she's safe." The woman's grip on the door tightened. "You can't come in without a warrant." She was right, technically, but something about this whole situation was setting off alarm bells in my head. The coaching conversation I'd overheard, the way she kept looking over her shoulder, the fact that someone had definitely called 911 from this house. "Miss Chen, if you don't let me verify that your daughter is safe, I'm going to have to call for backup and get Child Protective Services involved. Is that what you want?" Her face went white. "No, please don't do that. Katie's fine. I swear she's fine." "Then let me see her." She closed the door. I heard the security latch being removed, and then the door opened fully. The woman stepped back, but she stayed close to the entrance like she was ready to slam it shut again if she needed to. The house was exactly as bright as it had looked from outside. Every light was on, even the ceiling fan lights and the lamp by the couch. It was almost uncomfortable to look at after being outside in the dark. "Where is Katie?" I asked. "In her room, down the hall." I could see a hallway leading toward the back of the house. There were 3 doors, all of them closed. The woman followed me as I walked toward them, staying just a step behind like she was herding me in a specific direction. The first door was a bathroom. The second was what looked like the master bedroom. The third door had a small sign hanging on it that said, "Katie's Room," in pink letters with flowers around the border. I knocked softly on the door. "Katie? This is a police officer. I just want to make sure you're okay." No answer. I looked at the woman. "Is she a heavy sleeper?" "Very heavy. Always has been." I tried the door handle. It was locked. "Why is her bedroom door locked?" The woman's face flushed. She has nightmares sometimes. She locks it herself so she feels safer." "Miss Chen, I need you to unlock this door." "I don't have a key. When she locks it from the inside, there's no way to open it from out here." I examined the door more closely. It was a standard interior door with a simple lock, the kind you could open with a coin or a paper clip. But more importantly, I could see light coming from under the door, and I could hear something inside. Not sleeping sounds, not even breathing sounds. Something else. "Katie?" I called again, louder this time. "Can you hear me?" This time, there was an answer. A small voice, muffled by the door. "Yes." "Are you okay, honey?" "Yes." "Can you open the door for me?" A pause. Then, "I'm not supposed to." I looked at the woman. Her hands were shaking. "Katie, this is a police officer. It's okay to open the door. Mommy says I'm not supposed to open the door for anyone. But your mommy is right here with me. She says it's okay." Another pause. I could hear movement inside the room, like someone getting out of bed. "Mommy? Is it really okay?" The woman's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, baby, it's okay." The lock clicked, and the door opened slowly. A little girl peered out. She had dark hair like her mother, and she was wearing pajamas with cartoon characters on them. She looked like a normal 7-year-old except for her eyes. They were too serious, too careful, like she was constantly thinking about what she was supposed to say. "Hi, Katie. I'm Officer Martinez. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." She nodded. "I'm okay." "Were you sleeping?" "Yes." But she wasn't acting like a kid who'd just been woken up. No rubbing her eyes, no yawning, no confusion about what was happening. She was wide awake and alert. "Katie, did you or your mommy call 911 tonight?" She looked at her mother, then back at me. "What's 911? "It's the number you call when you need help from the police." "No, we didn't call anyone." I crouched down so I was at her eye level. "Katie, if someone was bothering you or your mommy, you could tell me about it. That's what police officers are for." She shook her head. "Nobody's bothering us." "What about your daddy? Does he live here?" Her answer came too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. "Daddy doesn't live here anymore." "When did he move out?" She looked at her mother again. "I don't remember." I stood up and looked around Katie's room. It was neat, organized, bed made, toys put away. But there was something off about it. The toys looked new, like they'd never been played with. The bed didn't look like anyone had been sleeping in it. And there were no personal items, no drawings taped to the walls, no stuffed animals, none of the clutter you'd expect in a 7-year-old's room. "Katie, how long have you lived in this house?" "I don't know." "Do you go to school around here?" Another glance at her mother. "Sometimes." "What school do you go to?" I don't remember the name." I was starting to get a very bad feeling about this whole situation. The child was clearly being coached to give specific answers, but I couldn't figure out why. What were they hiding? "Miss Chen, can I speak with you privately?" She nodded, and we walked back to the living room, leaving Katie in her doorway. "Ma'am, I have to ask, is Katie really your daughter?" Her face went white again. "Of course she is." "What kind of question is that?" "It's just that something seems off here, the way she's answering questions, the fact that she can't tell me what school she goes to. She's been through a lot lately. Her father and I went through a difficult divorce. She's still adjusting." "Where is her father now?" "I don't know. He left about 6 months ago. We haven't heard from him since." "What's his name?" "David. David Chen." I made a note in my book. "Ms. Chen, someone definitely called 911 from this house tonight. Our dispatcher heard a child's voice in the background. If it wasn't you or Katie, then who was it?" She was quiet for a long time. I could see her thinking, trying to decide what to say. "Maybe it was a neighbor," she said finally. "Sometimes the phone lines get crossed." "That's not how 911 works, ma'am. The call definitely came from your phone number." I heard a sound from the hallway. Katie was standing there, listening to our conversation. "Katie, honey, go back to your room," her mother said. But Katie didn't move. She was staring at me with those two serious eyes. "Officer," she said. "Yes, Katie? Can I tell you something?" Her mother took a step toward her. "Katie, you should go back to bed." "It's okay," I said. "What did you want to tell me, Katie?" She looked at her mother, then back at me. "Sometimes I hear things at night." "What kind of things?" "Voices coming from the basement." The woman's face went completely white. "Katie, that's just your imagination. We've talked about this. But I really do hear them. A man's voice, mostly. Sometimes he sounds angry. Katie, go to your room, now." But Katie kept talking. "And sometimes the phone rings, but Mommy won't answer it. She says we're not supposed to answer the phone anymore." I looked at the woman. "Ms. Chen, is there something you want to tell me?" She was shaking now. "Katie has a very active imagination. She's been having nightmares since the divorce." "Mommy, they're not nightmares if I'm awake when I hear them." "Katie, please go to your room." "Is there a basement in this house?" I asked. The woman nodded reluctantly. "But we don't use it. It's just storage." "I'd like to take a look." "I don't think that's necessary. Ma'am, your daughter says she hears voices coming from the basement. I need to check it out." She led me to a door in the kitchen that I hadn't noticed before. It was partially hidden behind a tall cabinet, and it had 2 deadbolt locks on it. Both were engaged. "Why is the basement door locked?" "For safety. Katie used to play down there, but the stairs are steep. I didn't want her to fall." I looked at the locks more closely. They were the kind that could only be opened from the kitchen side. If someone was in the basement, they couldn't get out unless someone upstairs unlocked the door. "Ms. Chen, I need you to open these locks." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the keys. When both deadbolts were open, I pulled the door toward me. A smell wafted up from below. Musty, stale air and something else. Something organic and unpleasant. "Do you have a flashlight?" I asked. She handed me a small one from a kitchen drawer. I turned it on and started down the stairs. They were steep and narrow, and they creaked under my weight. About halfway down, I could hear something. A scratching sound, like fingernails on wood. The basement was larger than I'd expected, running under most of the house. The ceiling was low, maybe 6.5 feet, and there were support beams every few feet. Most of the space was filled with boxes and old furniture, but in the far corner, I could see something that made my blood run cold. A mattress on the floor, blankets, a pillow, a plate with what looked like the remains of a sandwich. And sitting on the floor next to the mattress, a man. He was maybe 40, with dark hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. His clothes were dirty, and he was chained to one of the support beams by his ankle. When he saw my flashlight beam hit him, he looked up. His eyes were desperate, terrified. "Please," he whispered. "Please, help me." I drew my weapon and called up the stairs. "Miss Chen, I need you to come down here right now." "I can't," she called back. "I'm watching Katie." "Ma'am, come down here now or I'm calling for backup." I heard footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the circle of my flashlight beam, and when she saw the man in the corner, she started crying. "He's my husband," she said. "David. Why is he chained up in your basement?" "Because he hurt Katie. He did things to her, horrible things. I couldn't let him do it anymore." I looked at the man. He was shaking his head frantically. "That's not true," he said. "I never hurt Katie. I never even touched her." "Susan, tell him the truth." The woman was crying harder now. "I caught him in her room one night. She was only 6. I couldn't call the police because I knew they'd take her away while they investigated. I couldn't lose her. So you chained your husband in the basement. I had to protect her. I had to keep her safe. How long has he been down here? 6 months, maybe 7. I've lost track." I looked around the basement again. There was a bucket in one corner that I realized was being used as a toilet. The smell was overwhelming now that I knew what it was. "Ms. Chen, you can't keep a person chained up in your basement. That's kidnapping, false imprisonment. Even if he did what you say he did, this isn't legal." "But Katie's safe now. He can't hurt her anymore." I heard footsteps on the stairs again. Katie appeared, still in her pajamas. "Mommy? What's happening?" When she saw her father, her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't run to him or seem happy to see him. But she didn't seem afraid either. She just looked confused. "Daddy? Why are you down here?" David Chen looked at his daughter, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "Hi, baby. I've been sick. Mommy's been taking care of me." "Are you better now?" He looked at me, then at his wife. "I don't know, Katie. I hope so." I radioed for backup and an ambulance. This was way beyond what I could handle alone. Within 20 minutes, the house was full of police officers, paramedics, and social workers. David Chen was taken to the hospital to be checked out, and Susan Chen was arrested. Katie was placed in protective custody while Child Services tried to figure out what had really happened. The investigation took weeks. David Chen had indeed been chained in that basement for nearly 7 months. Susan had been feeding him scraps of food and letting him use a bucket for a bathroom. She'd convinced Katie that Daddy was sick and couldn't come upstairs because he might give her his illness. But here's the thing that still bothers me. We never could prove that David Chen had actually abused his daughter. The medical examination showed no signs of sexual abuse. Katie's statements were inconsistent, and it was clear she'd been coached by her mother. David passed a polygraph test. His friends and co-workers said he was a devoted father who would never hurt his child. Susan Chen, on the other hand, had a history of mental illness. Depression, anxiety, and what the psychiatrists called delusional episodes. She'd been hospitalized twice in the years before Katie was born, but David had never mentioned it because he didn't want people to think she was an unfit mother. The theory that emerged during the trial was that Susan had become convinced, without any real evidence, that her husband was abusing their daughter. The delusion was so strong that she'd actually convinced herself she'd witnessed things that never happened. When she confronted David about it, and he denied it, she decided the only way to protect Katie was to imprison him. The 911 call that brought me to the house that night had indeed been made by Katie. She'd found the phone and called for help, but when her mother discovered what she'd done, she'd coached the child to deny it. Katie was confused and scared, and she did what her mother told her to do. David Chen got custody of Katie after Susan was sentenced to 15 years in prison. They moved away from our town, and I never saw them again. But I heard through social services that Katie was doing well, that she was getting therapy to help her understand what had happened. The thing that haunts me about this case is how easy it would have been to accept Susan's explanation and walk away. If Katie hadn't mentioned hearing voices from the basement, if I hadn't insisted on checking it out, David Chen might have died down there. Susan was slowly starving him, whether she realized it or not. The doctor said he probably wouldn't have lasted another month. But it also makes me wonder how many other times I've been called to a house where someone was asking for help, and I didn't dig deep enough to find them. How many 911 hang-ups I've responded to where I took the first explanation I was given and left someone in danger. The scary thing about police work isn't the violent criminals or the dangerous situations. It's the normal-looking houses where absolutely horrible things are happening behind closed doors. And the only sign that something's wrong is a phone call that gets disconnected before anyone can say a word. The third case happened during what we call the dead shift. That stretch between 2 and 6 a.m. when the bars have closed and the early commuters haven't started their day yet. It's when the city feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I'd been on patrol for about 4 hours, mostly quiet except for a drunk and disorderly at the Greyhound station and a noise complaint from the apartment complex on 5th Street. Then Maria's voice crackled over the radio with that tone I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant this wasn't going to be routine. Unit 23. We've got a hang-up at 156 Pine Ridge Road. Caller stayed on the line for approximately 8 minutes. Dispatcher could hear what sounded like classical music, very faint, and what might have been someone crying. No response to callback attempts. Pine Ridge Road was out past the city limits, where the houses sat on larger lots and the streetlights were few and far between. It was the kind of area where people moved when they wanted privacy, when they had money, and didn't want neighbors close enough to hear their business. I'd been out there before. Domestic calls mostly, the kind where wealthy couples fought about affairs and money behind tall hedges and electronic gates. Number 156 was a large colonial house set back about 100 yards from the road. Even from the street I could see it was expensive. Manicured lawn, circular driveway, the kind of architectural details that cost extra. There were lights on in several windows, more than you'd expect at 3:30 in the morning. As I pulled into the driveway, I could see a Mercedes sedan parked near the front entrance and what looked like a Jaguar in the open garage. I walked up to the front door, noting the elaborate security system panel next to it, the kind that costs more than most people make in a month. But despite all that security, I could hear music coming from inside the house. Classical, like Maria had said. A piano piece, something slow and melancholy that seemed to drift through the walls. I pressed the doorbell and heard it chime somewhere deep inside the house. The music continued, but I didn't hear any footsteps or voices. I rang again, then knocked on the door with my flashlight. Police department, we received a call from this address. The music stopped immediately. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sound had been. It was too complete, too sudden, like someone had just switched off the entire house. I waited, then knocked again. Hello, police department. We got a 911 call from this number. A voice answered from somewhere inside, muffled by the heavy door. There must be some mistake. We didn't call anyone. It was a man's voice, cultured, with the kind of accent that suggested private schools and expensive universities. But there was something strained about it, like he was working hard to sound normal. "Sir, I'm going to need you to open the door so I can verify that everyone's safe." "That's really not necessary. As I said, we didn't make any calls." "Sir, our 911 system shows a call originating from this address. I need to follow up on that." A long pause. I could hear what sounded like whispered conversation, too quiet to make out words. Then the man's voice again. "Officer, my wife isn't feeling well tonight. She's been taking medication that makes her confused. Sometimes she picks up the phone without realizing what she's doing. I understand, sir, but I still need to verify that she's okay. She's sleeping now. If you wake her up, it will only make things worse." I'd heard variations of this conversation before, and it always made me suspicious. People who had nothing to hide didn't usually work this hard to avoid opening their door for a wellness check. "Sir, what's your name?" "Dr. Richard Hawthorne." "And your wife's name?" "Elizabeth. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne. 2 doctors." That explained the expensive house and cars, but it didn't explain why doctor. Richard Hawthorne was so reluctant to let me see his allegedly sick wife. "Dr. Hawthorne, I'm going to need you to open the door. This is standard procedure for a 911 call." More whispered conversation, and then I heard the sound of multiple locks being disengaged. The door opened about 6 inches, held by a security chain. A man's face appeared in the gap. Maybe 55, gray hair, wearing what looked like an expensive bathrobe. Behind him, I could see part of a grand foyer with a crystal chandelier and marble floors. "As you can see, officer, everything is fine here." But everything wasn't fine. Even through the small opening, I could smell something wrong. Not exactly medical, but chemical. Sharp and antiseptic. Like a hospital, but with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Dr. Hawthorne, I need to come inside and check on your wife." "I'm afraid that's not possible. She's heavily sedated, and any disturbance could set back her recovery." "What kind of medical condition does she have?" He hesitated just a fraction too long. "Depression. Severe depression with psychotic episodes. She's been hospitalized several times." "What medication is she taking?" Another hesitation. "Several different drugs. The psychiatrist has been adjusting her dosage." "I'd like to speak with her briefly, just to confirm that she's okay." "Officer, I'm a physician. I can assure you that my wife is receiving proper medical care." "What kind of doctor are you?" "Anesthesiologist. I work at Presbyterian Hospital." That explained the chemical smell, maybe. Anesthesiologists had access to all kinds of drugs that could knock someone unconscious, but it didn't explain why he was so determined to keep me from seeing his wife. "Dr. Hawthorne, I appreciate your concern for your wife's condition, but I have a job to do. Someone in this house called 911 tonight. I need to verify that person's safety. What if I have her speak to you from upstairs? Would that satisfy your requirements?" It was a reasonable compromise, but something about the way he suggested it bothered me. Like he was buying time to think of something else. That would be acceptable. He closed the door. I heard footsteps moving away from the entrance, then climbing stairs. The house was quiet for several minutes. Then I heard a woman's voice, very faint, calling from somewhere upstairs. "Officer, is someone there?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Officer Martinez with the police department. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just tired." Her voice sounded strange, slurred, like she was heavily medicated or had been drinking, or like she was talking with something in her mouth. "Ma'am, did you call 911 tonight?" A long pause. I don't remember. Maybe. I've been confused lately." Are you safe? Is anyone bothering you or hurting you? Another pause, longer this time. No, I'm safe. My husband is taking good care of me. Ma'am, can you come to the window so I can see you? I can't. I'm too weak to get out of bed. Dr. Hawthorne's voice came from closer to the door. Officer, as you can hear, my wife is heavily sedated. This conversation is very difficult for her. I looked up at the second-floor windows. Most of them were dark, but I could see light coming from one room toward the back of the house. As I watched, a shadow moved past the window. Then another shadow, larger, moving in the same direction. Dr. Hawthorne, I need you to open the door. Officer, I've allowed you to speak with my wife. She's confirmed that she's safe. Surely that's sufficient. Sir, open the door now, or I'm calling for backup. The door opened, but only wide enough for him to step outside. He closed it behind him and stood on the porch, blocking my access to the house. Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but you have to understand my position. My wife has been through a great deal lately. She's attempted suicide twice in the past 6 months. The slightest stress or disruption can trigger another episode. What kind of suicide attempts? Pills, mostly. She has access to a variety of medications through my practice. I've had to lock them up, but she's very resourceful when she's in that state of mind. It was a plausible story: depression, suicide attempts, a concerned husband trying to protect his fragile wife. But something about it felt rehearsed, like he'd told this story before. Dr. Hawthorne, has your wife been hospitalized recently? 3 weeks ago, she was in the psychiatric ward at Presbyterian for 10 days. Can you provide me with documentation of that? Of course, but not at this hour. The hospital records department won't be open until morning. I heard a sound from inside the house. A thump, like something heavy falling to the floor. Dr. Hawthorne heard it too, and his face went pale. What was that? Probably just the cat. We have several cats, and they're very active at night. But it hadn't sounded like a cat. It had sounded like a person falling or being dropped. Dr. Hawthorne, I need to come inside now. Officer, I really must insist. Sir, step aside or I'll arrest you for obstruction. He looked at me for a long moment, calculating. Then he sighed and opened the door. The smell hit me immediately. It was much stronger inside, that sharp chemical odor mixed with something sweet and organic. The kind of smell you might find in a veterinary clinic or a morgue. The foyer was as elegant as I'd glimpsed from outside. Marble floors, expensive artwork on the walls, a staircase that curved up to the second floor. But there were details that seemed off. The artwork was hung too precisely, like someone had measured the exact distance between each piece. The furniture was positioned with mathematical accuracy. Everything was too perfect, too controlled. Where is your wife? Upstairs, in our bedroom. I'd like to see her. Officer, I really don't think that's wise. As I explained, she's very fragile right now. I started toward the staircase. Dr. Hawthorne followed close behind, and I could hear his breathing getting faster. Dr. Hawthorne, how long has your wife been sick? About a year. It started gradually, just mood swings and insomnia. But it got worse after she lost her job. What kind of work did she do? She was a pediatrician, had her own practice for 15 years. Why did she lose her job? He was quiet for a moment. There were some allegations. Nothing proven, but the hospital felt it was better if she took a leave of absence. What kind of allegations? Some parents claimed she was giving their children unnecessary medications. Sedatives, mostly. The hospital investigated, but they couldn't prove anything. We reached the top of the stairs. The hallway was long and wide, with doors on both sides. All of them were closed except one at the far end. where I could see light spilling out. "Is that your bedroom?" "Yes." As we walked toward it, I noticed that each door we passed had a small placard next to it. Room numbers, like in a hospital. Room 201, Room 202, Room 203. But this was supposed to be a private residence. Dr. Hawthorne. What are these room numbers for? Oh, those. Elizabeth put them up during one of her episodes. She thought the house was a hospital. I just haven't gotten around to taking them down. We reached the lighted room. I could hear something inside. A soft rhythmic sound, like someone breathing deeply. But when I looked through the doorway, what I saw made my hand move instinctively toward my weapon. The room had been converted into what looked like a medical facility. There was a hospital bed with metal rails, IV stands monitoring equipment, and in the bed, connected to various tubes and wires, was a woman who might have been in her 40s. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing with the slow, steady rhythm of someone under heavy sedation. "Dr. Hawthorne, what is this?" "This is how I've been caring for Elizabeth. She requires constant monitoring." I moved closer to the bed. The woman's face was gaunt, like she'd lost a lot of weight recently. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and there were what looked like injection marks on her arms. "Is she conscious?" "Sometimes. The medication keeps her calm." I checked the IV bag hanging next to the bed. The label had been removed, but I could see that whatever was in it was being delivered at a steady rate. What medication is she receiving? A combination of sedatives and antipsychotics. Everything prescribed by her psychiatrist. But something was wrong with this picture. If Elizabeth Hawthorne was receiving legitimate medical care, why wasn't she in a hospital? Why had her husband converted their bedroom into a private medical facility? "Dr. Hawthorne, I need to see her medical records. They're confidential. Patient privacy laws." "Sir, I'm not asking as a casual observer. I'm conducting a welfare check based on a 911 call from this address." He was sweating now, despite the cool temperature in the house. "The records are in my office downstairs, but they're quite technical. You might not understand." "I'll take that risk." I heard that sound again from somewhere else in the house. The same thump I'd heard before, followed by what might have been a muffled voice. "Dr. Hawthorne, is there someone else in the house?" "No, just Elizabeth and myself." "What about the other rooms, the ones with the numbers on the doors?" "Those are just storage rooms now. Elizabeth's medical supplies, mostly." But as I looked more closely at the woman in the bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Her wrists had marks on them. Not injection marks, restraint marks. Like she'd been tied down and had struggled against the bonds. "Dr. Hawthorne, has your wife been restrained?" "Sometimes, during her more violent episodes, it's necessary for her own safety." "How often does she have these episodes?" "Less frequently now that I've stabilized her medication." I looked around the room again. Next to the bed was a small table with various medical instruments. Syringes, vials of medication, what looked like surgical tools. But there was something else that caught my attention. A video camera on a tripod, pointed at the bed. "What's the camera for?" Dr. Hawthorne followed my gaze and his face went even paler. "Medical documentation. I record her episodes so I can discuss them with her psychiatrist." "Can I see some of these recordings?" "They're quite disturbing. I don't think—" "Dr. Hawthorne, I need to see them." He led me to a computer in the corner of the room. The screen was already on, showing what looked like a video editing program. There were dozens of files listed, each labeled with a date and time. "Pick one," I said. He hesitated, then clicked on a file from 2 weeks earlier. The video began playing, and what I saw made me reach for my radio. The woman in the bed, Elizabeth, was awake and clearly distressed. She was trying to speak, but her words were slurred and difficult to understand. Dr. Hawthorne was in the frame, adjusting something on one of the IV stands. As I watched, Elizabeth became more agitated, trying to pull at the restraints on her wrists. "Please," she was saying, over and over, "please stop. I want to go home." Dr. Hawthorne's voice was calm, clinical. "You are home, Elizabeth. You're safe here. This isn't my home. I don't know where I am. You're confused because of your illness. The medication will help you feel better. I'm not sick. You're making me sick." The video continued for several more minutes, with Elizabeth becoming increasingly distressed and Dr. Hawthorne remaining unnaturally calm. Finally, he injected something into her IV line, and within seconds she became quiet and still. I stopped the video and turned to face him. "Dr. Hawthorne, I need you to step away from the bed. Officer, I know this looks disturbing, but you have to understand. Step away from the bed now." I moved between him and the woman, then leaned down to check her pulse. It was slow, but steady. Her breathing was shallow, and when I lifted one of her eyelids, her pupil was constricted to a pinpoint. "What did you give her?" "Just her regular medication." She was becoming agitated. "What medication? I want to see the vials." He pointed to the table next to the bed. There were several small bottles, but when I picked them up, I noticed that the labels had been carefully removed from all of them. "Why are there no labels on these medications?" I removed them for security reasons. So many people abuse prescription drugs these days. But that was clearly a lie. A doctor would never remove labels from medication bottles. It would be dangerous and potentially illegal. I radioed for backup and an ambulance. Whatever was happening in this house, it was way beyond what I could handle alone. "Dr. Hawthorne, I need you to sit down and keep your hands where I can see them." "Officer, you're making a terrible mistake. My wife is severely mentally ill. Everything I've done has been for her own protection. We'll let the hospital determine that." As we waited for backup to arrive, I heard that thumping sound again, louder this time. It was definitely coming from another part of the house. "Dr. Hawthorne, what's in the other rooms?" "Nothing. Just storage like I told you." But the sound came again, and this time I could hear what was definitely a human voice, muffled but urgent. "I'm going to check those rooms." "Officer, please don't. You don't understand what you're dealing with." I left him sitting next to his wife's bed and went back into the hallway. The sound was coming from behind the door marked Room 203. I tried the handle, but it was locked. "Dr. Hawthorne, I need the key to this room." "I don't have it with me." I kicked the door. It was solid, but the lock gave way after the second kick. The room beyond was dark, but I could see enough with my flashlight to make my blood run cold. There was another hospital bed, and another woman restrained to it. She was conscious, and when she saw my light, she started crying. "Help me," she whispered. "Please, help me." I rushed to her side. She was maybe 30, with blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. Like Elizabeth, she had injection marks on her arms, and the gray pallor of someone who'd been heavily sedated for a long time. "What's your name?" Sarah Mitchell. I'm a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital." "How long have you been here?" "I don't know, weeks, maybe months. He keeps me drugged most of the time." I started working on her restraints. "Who? Dr. Hawthorne?" "Yes." I was working the night shift in the ER. He came in with a patient, said she needed emergency psychiatric evaluation. But when I tried to process the paperwork, he injected me with something. Next thing I knew, I woke up here. The restraints were medical grade, the kind used in psychiatric facilities. but they'd been applied so tightly that her wrists were raw and bleeding. How many other people are here? I think there are 3 of us, maybe 4. He moves us around sometimes, and it's hard to keep track when you're sedated most of the time. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Dr. Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. He was holding Elizabeth Hawthorne, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. "Officer, please don't do anything rash. These women are very sick. They need the constant medical supervision." But Elizabeth Hawthorne was looking around the room with confusion, like she was seeing it for the first time. "Richard?" she said, her voice slurred but becoming clearer. "Where are we? This isn't our house." "Elizabeth, you're confused. The medication—" "What medication?" "Richard, what have you done to me?" I could hear sirens approaching outside. Backup was almost here. "Dr. Hawthorne, I need you to sit down on the floor and put your hands behind your head." "Officer, you don't understand. These women came to me for help. They were suicidal, addicted to drugs. I've been providing them with treatment." "Sir, sit down now." Elizabeth Hawthorne was becoming more alert, more aware of her surroundings. She looked at the restraints on Sarah's wrists, then at her own hospital gown. "Richard, what is this place? Why am I dressed like this?" "Elizabeth, please don't upset yourself. You've been very sick." "I haven't been sick. You've been drugging me." The truth was starting to come together in my mind. Dr. Richard Hawthorne had been kidnapping women, his wife, healthcare workers, probably others, and holding them prisoner in his house. He'd converted the upstairs into a private medical facility where he could keep them sedated and under his control. "Officer Martinez," a voice called from downstairs. My backup had arrived. "Up here," I called back. "I need paramedics and detectives." Within minutes, the house was full of police officers and medical personnel. Dr. Hawthorne was arrested, and the 3 women we found were taken to the hospital for evaluation and treatment. The investigation revealed that Richard Hawthorne had been running his operation for almost 2 years. He'd started with his wife, convincing her that she was mentally ill and needed his treatment. When she tried to leave or call for help, he'd sedate her and tell anyone who asked that she was having another episode. He'd expanded his operation by targeting women who worked at the hospital where he practiced. He'd use his position to gain their trust, then find opportunities to drug them and bring them to his house. The women he chose were usually single, without close family ties, so it took longer for people to notice they were missing. Sarah Mitchell had been missing for 6 weeks before we found her. Her supervisor at the hospital thought she'd quit without notice. Another woman, a pharmacy technician named Lisa Wong, had been there for 4 months. Her family thought she'd moved to another state for a new job. The 911 call that brought me to the house had been made by Elizabeth Hawthorne during a brief period when her sedation had worn off enough for her to think clearly. She'd managed to get to a phone and dial 911, but Dr. Hawthorne had found her before she could speak to the dispatcher. All 3 women survived, though their recovery took months. The psychological trauma of being held captive and repeatedly drugged was almost as damaging as the physical effects of the medications they'd been given. Dr. Hawthorne was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his trial, it came out that he'd had fantasies about controlling women since medical school. His colleagues described him as brilliant but strange. Someone who seemed to view patients as objects to be studied rather than people to be helped. The case changed how I respond to 911 hang-ups. Before that night, I might have accepted Dr. Hawthorne's explanation about his sick wife and left without investigating further. Now, I know that the most dangerous situations often hide behind the most reasonable explanations. The scariest thing about Richard Hawthorne wasn't that he was obviously crazy or violent. It was that he seemed so normal, so professional, so concerned about his wife's welfare. He had an answer for every question, a medical explanation for every symptom. If I hadn't heard that sound from the other room, if I hadn't insisted on checking those locked doors, those women might still be there. Sometimes I wonder how many other Dr. Hawthorns are out there, hiding behind professional credentials and reasonable explanations. How many 911 hang-ups I've responded to where I accepted the first story I was told and walked away, leaving someone trapped and helpless. The fourth case came during a blizzard in February, the kind of storm that shuts down the entire city and leaves you feeling like you're the only person left in the world. The snow had been falling for 18 hours straight, and most of the roads were impassable. We were running with a skeleton crew, just 3 units covering the entire city, and 2 of those were stuck helping with weather-related emergencies. I was in the only patrol car still mobile, a 4-wheel drive Explorer that could barely make it through the drifts that were piling up against buildings and blocking intersections. The call came in at 4:15 a.m., right in the heart of the storm. Maria's voice was barely audible over the static from the radio interference the weather was causing. Unit 12, we've got a hang-up at 2847 Oakwood Drive. Call came in about 3 minutes ago, stayed open for nearly 10 minutes. Dispatcher could hear what sounded like wind, maybe a door or window banging, and possibly someone breathing heavily. Location is showing as a single-family residence, but we're not getting any response to callback attempts. Oakwood Drive was in the Millbrook section, an older neighborhood where most of the residents were elderly and lived on fixed incomes. It was the kind of area where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other, especially during bad weather. If someone there was in trouble, it could be serious. Medical emergency, furnace failure, roof collapse from the weight of all that snow. The drive took me 25 minutes through streets that were barely recognizable under 3 feet of snow. The city plows had given up hours ago, and my Explorer was the only vehicle I saw moving. The storm had an eerie quality to it. The snow was falling so thick it seemed to muffle all sound, creating a bubble of silence around the car that made every noise seem amplified and unnatural. 2847 Oakwood was a small Cape Cod house with dark green shutters and a front porch that was completely buried under snow. The driveway hadn't been plowed, and there were no tire tracks or footprints visible anywhere around the property. If someone lived there, they hadn't been outside in quite a while. The house was completely dark, except for what looked like the flicker of candlelight or a fireplace coming from one of the front windows. I parked as close as I could get and waded through the snow to the front door. The wind was vicious, cutting through my heavy coat like it was made of paper. By the time I reached the porch, my face was numb and my eyes were watering so badly I could barely see. I knocked on the door, but the sound was almost lost in the howling of the wind. I knocked again, harder, and called out, "Police Department." We received a call from this address. No response. I tried the doorbell, but I couldn't hear it ring over the storm. The wind was so loud it was making conversation impossible, so I put my ear against the door and listened. I could hear something inside, a rhythmic tapping sound, like someone knocking on wood. But it wasn't in response to my knocking. It was steady, mechanical, like a metronome or a clock with a very loud tick. I walked around to the side of the house, fighting through drifts that came up to my knees. There was a window that looked into what might have been a living room, and I could see the source of the flickering light. It was a fireplace, and there was definitely a fire burning. But I couldn't see anyone moving around inside. The tapping sound was louder near this window, and now I could tell it was coming from inside the house. It wasn't random, there was a pattern to it. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 quick taps, pause, over and over again, like someone was trying to signal for help. I went back to the front door and tried the handle. It was unlocked, which surprised me, In weather like this, most people would have their doors securely locked and probably barricaded against the wind. I called out again as I entered. "Police department? Is anyone here?" The inside of the house was surprisingly warm, heated by the fire that was crackling in the living room fireplace, but it was also eerily quiet now that I was out of the wind. The tapping sound had stopped as soon as I opened the door. The living room was small and neat, furnished with the kind of furniture you'd expect in an elderly person's home. Floral print sofa, doilies on the end tables, family photos covering every available surface. But there was no one there. I called out again, "Hello?" "This is Officer Martinez with the police department. We received a call from this number." Still no response. I moved through the house, checking each room. Kitchen, dining room, bathroom, all empty. There was a narrow staircase leading to what looked like a finished attic, but when I called up there, no one answered. I went back to the living room. The fire was burning strongly, like it had been recently tended. There was a poker leaning against the hearth that was still warm to the touch. Someone had definitely been here recently, but where had they gone? I was about to call in and report the house empty when I heard the tapping again. It was coming from below me, the basement. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 quick taps, pause. Definitely intentional, definitely a signal. I found the basement door in the kitchen. It was closed, but not locked. I opened it and called down, "Hello? Police department? Is someone down there?" The tapping stopped immediately, but I could hear something else now. Breathing. Slow, careful breathing, like someone trying to be very quiet. "If someone's down there, I'm here to help. We received a 911 call from this address." A voice answered, very faint and shaky. "Please, help me." It was an elderly woman's voice, weak and frightened. I drew my flashlight and started down the stairs. The basement was unfinished, with concrete walls and a low ceiling. My flashlight beam swept across boxes, old furniture, the typical accumulation of decades of living in one place. But in the far corner, I could see someone huddled on the floor behind an old washing machine. "Ma'am? I'm Officer Martinez. Are you hurt?" I moved closer and saw an elderly woman, maybe 75, wearing a heavy robe and slippers. She was sitting on the concrete floor with her back against the wall, and she was shivering despite the robe. "Thank God," she whispered. "I've been down here for hours." "What's your name, ma'am?" "Dorothy Kellerman. I live here." "Mrs. Kellerman, what are you doing down here? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt, but I can't get back upstairs. The door, something's wrong with the door." I looked back at the basement door I'd just come through. It looked normal to me, standard wooden door with a simple latch handle. "What's wrong with the door?" "It won't open from this side. I've been trying for hours, but it's stuck somehow." I walked back to the stairs and tried the door from the basement side. The handle turned easily, and the door swung open without any resistance. "Mrs. Kellerman, the door opens fine. See?" I demonstrated, opening and closing it several times. She watched with confusion. "But it wouldn't open before. I tried and tried." "Maybe you were just too weak from the cold. How long have you been down here?" "Since last night. I came down to check the furnace because the house was getting cold, but when I tried to come back up, the door wouldn't budge." I helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, and I could tell the cold had gotten to her. Her lips had a blue tinge, and her hands were like ice. "Let's get you upstairs where it's warm." I supported her weight as we climbed the stairs, and once we were back in the kitchen, I helped her to a chair near the fireplace. "Mrs. Kellerman, do you have any family I can call? Anyone who checks on you regularly?" "My daughter lives in Phoenix. My son is in Seattle. I don't have anyone local." "What about neighbors?" The Hendersons next door usually keep an eye on things, but they went to Florida for the winter. I looked around the house again. Everything seemed normal. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of any kind of struggle or accident. Just an elderly woman who'd gotten trapped in her basement during a blizzard. Mrs. Kellerman, you said you called 911. She looked confused. Did I? I don't remember calling anyone. Someone called from this number about an hour ago. The dispatcher heard the line stay open, but no one spoke. Oh, maybe I did try to call. I was so frightened down there in the dark. But I don't remember anyone answering. I checked the phone in the kitchen. It was an old rotary model, the kind that was probably installed when the house was built 40 years ago. The receiver was in its cradle, and when I picked it up, I got a dial tone. Mrs. Kellerman, is this the only phone in the house? Yes, just the one. But you said you were trapped in the basement. How did you call 911 from down there? She stared at me, and I could see her trying to work through the logic of what I'd just asked. I don't know. I thought I called, but maybe I imagined it. It was possible. Elderly people under stress sometimes became confused about what had actually happened versus what they'd wished had happened. She might have wanted to call for help so badly that she convinced herself she had. Mrs. Kellerman, let me check your furnace. You said the house was getting cold. Yes, that's why I went downstairs. It stopped working yesterday afternoon. I went back to the basement and found the furnace. It was an old oil-burning unit, probably 30 years old. When I checked the controls, I found the problem immediately. Someone had turned off the main power switch. It wasn't a mechanical failure. The furnace had been deliberately shut off. I flipped the switch back on, and the furnace rumbled to life. But that raised a new question. If Mrs. Kellerman had gone down to check on the furnace, why hadn't she noticed that it was simply turned off? And more importantly, who had turned it off in the first place? I went back upstairs and found Mrs. Kellerman sitting exactly where I'd left her, staring into the fire. Mrs. Kellerman, your furnace is working now. Someone had turned off the power switch. Turned it off? Why would anyone do that? I don't know. Do you remember turning it off for any reason? No, I never touched those controls. I don't understand how they work. Is there anyone else who has access to your house? A handyman, maybe a cleaning service? No, nobody like that. I take care of everything myself. But as I looked around the house more carefully, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit. The fire in the fireplace was burning too well for something an elderly woman would have built herself. The logs were positioned perfectly for maximum heat output, and there was kindling arranged in a way that suggested someone who really knew what they were doing. Mrs. Kellerman, did you build this fire? Yes, I think so. When the heat went out, I thought the fireplace might help. When did you build it? Before I went to the basement, maybe around midnight. But that was impossible. If she'd been trapped in the basement since midnight and it was now almost 5 a.m., the fire should have died down to embers by now. This fire looked like it had been built or at least tended much more recently. Mrs. Kellerman, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has anyone else been in your house tonight? She was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. Then, very quietly, I don't know. What do you mean? Sometimes I hear things. Footsteps upstairs when I'm down in the kitchen. Doors closing when I'm sure I left them open. I thought it was just the house settling. Or maybe my imagination. How long has this been going on? A few weeks, maybe a month, since the Hendersons left for Florida. Have you seen anyone? Actually seen a person in your house? No, never seen anyone. Just sounds. And sometimes things aren't where I left them. I was starting to get a very bad feeling about this situation. An elderly woman living alone, strange sounds in the house, things being moved around, and now a mysteriously maintained fire and a furnace that had been deliberately turned off. Mrs. Kellerman, I want you to stay right here by the fire. I'm going to check the house again. This time, I went through every room more carefully. In the kitchen, I noticed that there were 2 coffee cups in the sink, both recently used. In the bathroom, there were 2 towels hanging on the rack, one of which was still damp. And in the bedroom, the bed had clearly been slept in, but there were impressions for 2 people, not 1. I came back to the living room. Mrs. Kellerman, have you had any visitors recently? No, no visitors. I don't get many visitors in weather like this. What about before the storm, in the past week or so? Well, there was the young man who came about the furnace. I felt my hand move instinctively toward my weapon. What young man? He said he was from the gas company. He needed to check the furnace for safety reasons. When was this? 3 days ago, maybe 4, right before the storm started. Did you call the gas company to have your furnace checked? No, he just showed up. Said it was routine maintenance. Mrs. Kellerman, what did this man look like? Oh, he was very nice, maybe 30, 35, clean-cut, polite. He had a clipboard and everything. Did he show you any identification? I think so. He had a uniform shirt with a logo on it. How long was he here? About an hour. He spent most of the time in the basement checking all the equipment. I felt my stomach tighten. A stranger had been in her house 3 days ago, had spent time alone in the basement where I'd found Mrs. Kellerman trapped, and now her furnace had been deliberately turned off during a blizzard. Mrs. Kellerman, after he left, did you notice anything missing or out of place? Well, now that you mention it, I did notice that the spare key was missing. What spare key? I keep a spare house key hidden under a flower pot on the back porch. After he left, I went to check on it and it was gone. This was escalating from a welfare check to a potential breaking and entering, possibly worse. Someone had been in Mrs. Kellerman's house, had stolen her spare key, and was apparently coming and going as he pleased. Mrs. Kellerman, I need you to think very carefully. Tonight, when you went to the basement, are you absolutely certain the door worked normally? She was quiet for a long moment, concentrating. You know, now that I think about it, when I first tried to open the door, it seemed fine, but then it wouldn't open anymore, like someone had done something to it from the other side. What do you mean? Like maybe someone had blocked it somehow, or was holding it shut. The implications of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. If someone had been in the house while she was in the basement, if they had deliberately trapped her down there during a blizzard, then this wasn't just breaking and entering. This was attempted murder. I radioed for backup, but with the storm still raging, I knew it would be at least an hour before anyone could get there. I was on my own. Mrs. Kellerman, I want you to stay right here by the fire. Don't move. Don't answer the door for anyone except another police officer. Do you understand? Yes, but why? What's wrong? I think someone may have been in your house tonight. Someone who shouldn't be here. I drew my weapon and started a systematic search of the house. This time, I wasn't just looking for signs that someone had been there. I was looking for signs that someone might still be there. The kitchen yielded more clues. The back door was unlocked, and when I examined it closely, I could see that the lock had been recently lubricated. The person with Mrs. Kellerman's spare key had been using it regularly. Upstairs, I found what I was looking for. The attic access was in the ceiling of the small bedroom, and the ladder was pulled down. When I climbed up and swept the space with my flashlight, I found a makeshift living area. Sleeping bag, portable camping stove. several days' worth of food and water. And most disturbing of all, dozens of photographs of Mrs. Kellerman taken from inside her house. Pictures of her sleeping, eating, watching television. Pictures taken over what looked like several weeks. Someone had been living in her attic, watching her, documenting her daily routine. The fake gas company visit had been a way to get inside and case the house, to find the best hiding spots and learn her habits. I climbed back down and called to Mrs. Kellerman. "Everything's okay, but I need you to stay exactly where you are." But when I got back to the living room, she wasn't there. The fire was still burning, her chair was still warm, but Mrs. Kellerman was gone. "Mrs. Kellerman," I called. No answer. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, no sign of her. Then I heard a sound from the basement, that same rhythmic tapping I'd heard when I first arrived. I rushed to the basement door. It was closed, and when I tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. Someone had jammed it from the other side. "Mrs. Kellerman, can you hear me?" The tapping stopped, and I heard her voice, much weaker now. "Help me, please." But there was another voice, a man's voice, too quiet for me to make out the words. Someone was down there with her. I put my shoulder against the door and pushed hard. Whatever was blocking it gave way, and the door flew open. I rushed down the stairs, weapon drawn. Mrs. Kellerman was back in the same corner where I'd found her before, but this time she wasn't alone. A man was crouched next to her, and he had something in his hand that caught the light from my flashlight. A knife. "Police, drop the weapon." He looked up at me, and I could see his face clearly for the first time. Thin, pale, with dark hair, and the kind of eyes that suggested he hadn't slept normally in quite a while. He was wearing work clothes and had a name tag that said, "Tom, Gas Company." "She was supposed to die quietly," he said, his voice eerily calm. "The cold was supposed to take her gradually, but she's tougher than she looks. Drop the knife and step away from her. Do you know how long I've been watching her? Weeks, learning everything about her. When she sleeps, what she eats, who visits her. Nobody visits her. Nobody would have missed her until spring." Mrs. Kellerman was conscious but clearly in shock. She was staring at the man like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. "Why?" I asked, keeping my weapon trained on him. "Why her? She was perfect. Old, alone, no family nearby. This house was perfect too, isolated, surrounded by empty lots. I could have lived here for months after she was gone and nobody would have known. So, you've been living in her attic. Just for a few weeks while I planned everything out. The furnace was the key. Turn it off during a blizzard, and everyone would assume she died of hypothermia. Natural causes, no investigation. But she didn't die. No, she's tougher than I thought. When I heard you knocking on the door, I had to improvise. Trapped her in the basement while I figured out what to do. And what did you figure out?" He smiled, and it was one of the most chilling expressions I'd ever seen. That sometimes plans have to change. Sometimes accidents happen during home invasions. He raised the knife, but I was ready for him. 2 shots, center mass. He dropped immediately. Mrs. Kellerman was unharmed physically, but the psychological trauma took months to heal. She moved in with her daughter in Phoenix a week after the incident, leaving the house empty. As far as I know, it's still empty. Nobody wanted to buy a house where something like that had happened. The man's name was Thomas Brennan, and he turned out to be a legitimate gas company employee who had been using his job to scout potential victims. The company had no idea what he was doing. He would volunteer for calls in neighborhoods with elderly residents, then use the access to case houses and identify vulnerable targets. Mrs. Kellerman was his third intended victim. The first two had died exactly as he'd planned. Apparent hypothermia during power outages that he'd arranged. Both deaths had been ruled accidental, and nobody had ever connected them to the gas company visits that had preceded them. The 911 call that brought me to Mrs. Kellerman's house had indeed been made by her, but not in the way anyone expected. Brennan had rigged the phone in the basement to automatically dial 911 if the receiver was lifted, as a way to create an alibi for himself. He planned to be long gone by the time police arrived, leaving behind what would look like an elderly woman who had died trying to call for help. But Mrs. Kellerman had survived longer than he'd expected, and the storm had delayed his planned departure. When I arrived earlier than he'd anticipated, he'd been forced to improvise. First, trapping her in the basement, then planning to make her death look like a home invasion gone wrong. The case made me realize how vulnerable elderly people really are, especially those living alone. Someone like Thomas Brennan could watch them for weeks, learning their routines, identifying their weaknesses, all while appearing to be a helpful service worker. It also made me understand that 911 hang-ups aren't always what they seem. Sometimes the call is exactly what it appears to be, a cry for help from someone who can't or won't speak. But sometimes it's something much more sinister, a trap set by someone who understands exactly how the system works and how to manipulate it. After that night, I started paying much closer attention to the details of every hang-up call. Who lives at the address, what services they've received recently, whether there have been any other unusual calls from the same location. Because sometimes the person who needs help isn't the one who made the call. And sometimes the most innocent-seeming explanation is actually the most dangerous one of all. The fifth case happened during my final year on the force, when I thought I'd seen everything there was to see. I was wrong. It came in on a quiet Sunday evening in late September, the kind of night when families are home having dinner and the city feels peaceful and settled. I was parked outside the high school finishing up some paperwork when Maria's voice came over the radio with that familiar edge of concern. Unit 19, we've got a hang-up at 624 Riverside Court. Call came in approximately 6 minutes ago. Line stayed open for about 8 minutes. Dispatcher reports hearing what sounded like children's voices, possibly playing, and maybe a television in the background. Multiple callback attempts unsuccessful. Riverside Court was in the newer section of town, where young families moved when they wanted good schools and safe neighborhoods. It was the kind of street where kids rode bicycles on the sidewalks, and parents felt comfortable letting them play outside until dark. 624 was a 2-story colonial with a large front yard and a swing set visible in the back. There were lights on throughout the house, and I could see what looked like a minivan and an SUV in the driveway. I parked behind the SUV and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, I heard exactly what Maria had described. Children's voices, laughing and talking, coming from somewhere inside the house. It sounded normal, happy, the kind of sounds you'd expect from a house with kids on a Sunday evening. I rang the doorbell and heard it chime inside. The children's voices continued, but I didn't hear any adult footsteps coming to answer the door. I rang again and knocked. Police department, we received a call from this address. The children's voices stopped abruptly, like someone had just turned off a television. But then I heard something else, whispering. Urgent, hushed conversation between what sounded like multiple people. Hello? I called louder. Police department, we got a 911 call from this number. A woman's voice answered from somewhere inside. Just a minute, please. I waited, but the minute stretched into several minutes. I could hear movement inside the house, but it sounded strange. Not like normal walking around, more like people moving carefully, trying to be quiet. Finally, the door opened about halfway. A woman appeared, maybe mid-30s, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, looked perfectly normal except for her eyes. They were wide, alert, like someone who was trying very hard to appear calm. "Officer, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I was getting the children settled." "Ma'am, we received a 911 call from this address. Is everything okay here?" "A 911 call?" "No, we didn't call anyone. Are you sure you have the right address?" "Yes, ma'am. The call definitely came from this number. What's your name?" "Jennifer Walsh. This is my house." "Is your husband home, Mrs. Walsh?" "No, he's traveling for work. It's just me and the kids tonight." I could still hear children's voices from inside the house, but they were much quieter now, like they were trying not to be heard. "How many children do you have?" "3, 2 boys and a girl." "Mrs. Walsh, one of your children may have accidentally called 911. It happens sometimes when kids are playing with the phone." "Oh, that's probably what it was. I'm sorry if they bothered anyone." "It's no problem. Can I speak with them briefly, just to let them know that 911 is only for emergencies?" She hesitated, and I saw her glance back into the house. "They're eating dinner right now. Could we do this another time?" "It'll just take a minute, Mrs. Walsh. I really don't think it's necessary. I'll talk to them myself about the phone." Something about her reluctance to let me see the children was bothering me. In my experience, most parents were happy to let police officers talk to their kids about safety issues. "Mrs. Walsh, I'd really like to speak with them. Standard procedure for 911 hang-ups involving children." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her thinking. Then, "Of course, let me just go get them." She closed the door, and I heard her footsteps moving away from the entrance. But instead of the normal sounds of a mother calling her children, I heard urgent whispering again. And something else. A man's voice, very quiet, giving what sounded like instructions. That was concerning. Mrs. Walsh had said her husband was traveling, but there was definitely an adult male in the house. I knocked on the door again. "Mrs. Walsh, is everything okay in there?" The door opened, but this time a different person was standing there. A man, maybe 40, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. He looked tired, stressed, like he hadn't slept well in a while. "Officer, I'm sorry about the confusion. I'm Jennifer's husband, Michael Walsh. I thought Mrs. Walsh said you were traveling. I just got back. My flight was delayed, and Jennifer wasn't expecting me until tomorrow. Can I see some identification, Mr. Walsh?" He reached for his wallet and handed me his driver's license. The name matched, and the address was correct, but something about his demeanor was setting off alarm bells in my head. "Mr. Walsh, we received a 911 call from your house. Your wife said it might have been one of your children playing with the phone." "Yes, that's probably what happened. Kids, you know how they are. I'd like to speak with them about it." "Of course. Kids, come here for a minute." I heard footsteps, and 3 children appeared behind Mr. Walsh. 2 boys who looked like they might be 8 and 10, and a girl who was maybe 6. They were clean, well-dressed, but they all had the same look in their eyes that I'd seen in their mother. Alert, cautious, like they were carefully thinking about what to say. "Hi, kids. I'm Officer Martinez. Did one of you call 911 tonight?" They looked at each other, then at their father. The oldest boy spoke up. "We were playing with the phone in the kitchen. Maybe we dialed it by accident." "Do you know what 911 is for?" "Emergencies," the girl said. "When someone's hurt or in danger." "That's right. So you should only call 911 if there's a real emergency, okay?" They all nodded. "Okay," they said in unison. "Are you guys okay? Is anyone hurt or scared?" Again, they looked at their father before answering. "We're fine," the middle boy said. Something about the whole interaction felt rehearsed, like the children had been coached on what to say, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was wrong. "Mr. Walsh, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Of course." "Jennifer, why don't you take the kids back to finish their dinner?" Mrs. Walsh appeared and ushered the children away from the door. Mr. Walsh stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Mr. Walsh, I have to ask, is there some kind of problem in your house tonight?" "What do you mean?" "Your wife seemed very nervous when I first got here. The children seem unusually well behaved and careful about what they say. And you said you just got back from a trip, but your wife acted like she wasn't expecting you." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street. "Officer, can I be honest with you?" "Of course." "We've been having some problems, marriage problems. Jennifer and I are probably going to separate, and the kids are picking up on the tension. Everyone's been walking on eggshells around here." It was a reasonable explanation, and it would account for the nervous behavior I'd observed, but something still felt off. "Mr. Walsh, where were you traveling? For work?" "Chicago, sales conference." "When did you leave?" "Friday morning." "And you just got back tonight?" "About an hour ago." I looked at the cars in the driveway. Both looked like they'd been there for a while. No melting snow on the windshields, no warm hoods to suggest recent driving. "Which car did you drive to the airport?" He glanced at the driveway. "I took a cab, easier than dealing with airport parking." "Can I see your boarding passes?" I threw them away at the airport. "Why all the questions, officer?" "Just standard procedure, Mr. Walsh. When we get a 911 hang-up, we like to be thorough." "I understand, but like I said, it was probably just the kids playing with the phone." I heard a sound from inside the house. It sounded like something heavy being dropped, followed by a child's voice saying, "Ow!" But it was cut off quickly, like someone had covered the child's mouth. What was that? Probably just the kids horsing around. You know how kids are. But I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Mr. Walsh, I'd like to come inside and make sure everyone's okay." "I don't think that's necessary. The kids are fine, just tired and cranky." "Sir, I heard what sounded like a child in pain. I need to verify that everyone's safe." "Officer, I appreciate your concern, but this is our home. Unless you have a warrant." "Mr. Walsh, I don't need a warrant to conduct a welfare check. Someone in your house called 911, and I have a responsibility to make sure everyone's safe." He looked like he was about to argue further, but then the door opened behind him. Mrs. Walsh appeared, and she looked even more nervous than before. "Michael, maybe we should just let the officer come in. It's fine." Mr. Walsh looked at his wife, and I saw something pass between them. Not a look of love or concern, but something else. Fear, maybe, or warning. "Of course," he said. "Come on in, officer." I followed them into the house. The living room was neat and well furnished, with children's toys scattered around in a way that looked deliberately casual. But I noticed that some of the toys looked like they'd been hastily placed there. A teddy bear sitting perfectly upright on the couch, blocks arranged in a too-neat pile on the coffee table. "Where are the children now?" "Upstairs getting ready for bed," Mrs. Walsh said. "Can I see them?" "They're probably in the bath right now, maybe in a few minutes." I looked around the room more carefully. On the mantel above the fireplace were family photos, the Walshes and their 3 children at various ages, vacation pictures, school photos. But something about the pictures was bothering me. In the older photos, the family looked happy, relaxed. But in the more recent ones, everyone looked tense, forced, like they were trying too hard to appear normal. "Mrs. Walsh, how long have you lived in this house?" "About 5 years. We moved here when Tommy started kindergarten." And you both work? Michael's in sales, like he said. I'm a nurse at the hospital. Which hospital? Presbyterian. I work in pediatrics. I made a mental note of that. If she really was a nurse, that would be easy to verify. Mrs. Walsh, can I ask you about the 911 call? When the dispatcher kept the line open, she could hear children's voices for several minutes. But when I arrived, you said your husband was traveling, and it was just you and the kids. She glanced at her husband. I was confused. Like Michael said, I wasn't expecting him back tonight. But the call came in about an hour ago. If he just got home an hour ago, then he would have arrived right around the time the call was made. I guess that's right. The timing was probably just a coincidence. I heard footsteps upstairs, but they sounded heavy. Too heavy for children. Are all 3 of your children upstairs? Yes, they're getting ready for bed. Mr. Walsh, you said you just got back from Chicago. Do you have any luggage? He pointed to a small carry-on bag sitting by the front door. Just that? For a 3-day business trip? I travel light. I walked over to the bag. It was expensive leather, well made, but it looked brand new, like it had never been used before. Mr. Walsh, can you tell me the name of the hotel you stayed at in Chicago? The Marriott. Downtown. Which Marriott? There are several downtown. I don't remember the exact name. Something with center in it, I think. I was becoming more and more convinced that something was seriously wrong in this house. Michael Walsh's story about the business trip didn't add up. The children seemed coached, and both adults were exhibiting signs of extreme stress. Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, I'm going to need you to call your children downstairs. Officer, they're really tired. It's been a long day. Call them down now, please. Mrs. Walsh looked at her husband, then called up the stairs. Kids, can you come down here for a minute? We waited, but there was no response. Kids, she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. But I could definitely hear movement upstairs, and it sounded like more than 3 children. I'm going to go upstairs and check on them. No, Mr. Walsh said too quickly. I mean, they might not be dressed. Let me go get them. Sir, I need you to stay right here. I started toward the staircase, but Mr. Walsh moved to block my path. Officer, this is my home. You can't just go wandering around upstairs without permission. Mr. Walsh, step aside. I want to see a warrant. Sir, I'm conducting a welfare check based on a 911 call from this address. I don't need a warrant. Mrs. Walsh was crying now, quietly but steadily. Michael, just let him go upstairs, please. Jennifer, shut up. The way he said it, the tone of his voice, made my hand move instinctively toward my weapon. This wasn't a husband speaking to his wife about a difficult situation. This was someone giving an order and expecting it to be obeyed. Mr. Walsh, I need you to step away from the stairs. And I need you to get out of my house. I drew my weapon. Sir, hands where I can see them. Whoa, there's no need for that. Hands up now. He raised his hands, but I could see him looking around the room, calculating, like he was considering making a run for it. Mrs. Walsh, are you and your children in danger? She looked at her husband, then at me. Tears were streaming down her face. Please, she whispered. Please help us. What's going on here, Mrs. Walsh? He's not my husband. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? My husband is dead. Michael died 6 months ago in a car accident. This man, I don't know who he is. He just showed up one day and said he was moving in. The man I'd been talking to, the man who'd been calling himself Michael Walsh, laughed. Actually laughed. You should have kept your mouth shut, Jennifer. Where are the real children? I asked. Upstairs. They're okay, but they're scared. He's been making us pretend to be a family. I radioed for backup, keeping my weapon trained on the fake Michael Walsh. Unit 19, I need immediate backup at 624 Riverside Court. Possible hostage situation with children involved. Roger. Unit 19. Units en route. The man was still smiling. You know, officer, this was working out so well. Nobody questions a happy family. Nobody looks too closely at people who seem normal. What's your real name? Does it matter? I've been Michael Walsh for 6 months now. The real Michael Walsh was a traveling salesman. Gone for days at a time, didn't have many friends, kept to himself. When he died, it was easy to just step into his life. How did you get into their house? Jennifer let me in, didn't you, Jennifer? I told her I was a friend of her dead husband's, that I had some of his personal effects to return. Once I was inside, well, it was easier to stay than to leave. Mrs. Walsh was sobbing now. He said he'd hurt the children if I tried to call for help or tell anyone. But one of them did call for help, didn't they? I said to the man. One of the kids called 911. Smart little girl, Tommy, the 6-year-old. She figured out how to dial 911 without me noticing. But she got scared when the dispatcher answered and hung up. So you coached everyone on what to say when the police arrived. Had to. Couldn't have anyone asking too many questions. I heard sirens approaching. Backup was almost here. Why? I asked. Why do this? Why not just leave after the real Michael Walsh died? Because this was perfect. A ready-made family, a nice house, a normal life. Do you know how hard it is to build an identity from scratch? But this way, I had everything I needed already in place. What about when the children got older? When they started asking questions? His smile faded. I was still working on that part. The sirens were getting louder. Within minutes, the house would be surrounded by police officers. One more question, I said. What were you planning to do with Mrs. Walsh and the children eventually? Eventually? Officer, I wasn't planning anything eventually. I was planning to be Michael Walsh for the rest of my life. And they were going to be my family for the rest of theirs. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so casual, made my skin crawl. This wasn't someone who had just stumbled into a bad situation. This was someone who had deliberately chosen to destroy a family's life and thought it was perfectly reasonable. Backup arrived, and within 20 minutes we had the situation secured. The fake Michael Walsh was arrested, and Mrs. Walsh and her 3 children were taken to the hospital for evaluation. The children were physically unharmed, but the psychological damage was severe. They'd been living with a stranger for 6 months, forced to pretend he was their father, too terrified to call for help. The investigation revealed that the man's real name was David Crenshaw, and he had a history of identity theft and fraud going back 20 years. He'd been watching the Walsh family for weeks before Michael's death, learning their routines, their relationships, their daily lives. When Michael died in the car accident, Crenshaw saw an opportunity and took it. He'd been living in their house for 6 months, sleeping in their bed, eating their food, playing the role of husband and father. Mrs. Walsh had been too terrified to resist, and the children had been too young to fully understand what was happening. The 911 call that brought me to the house had indeed been made by 6-year-old Tommy, who had somehow figured out that the man claiming to be her father wasn't really her father. She'd managed to dial 911 when Crenshaw wasn't watching, but got scared when the dispatcher answered and hung up. Mrs. Walsh and her children eventually moved away from the area and started new lives somewhere else. Crenshaw was sentenced to 25 years in prison for kidnapping, fraud, and a dozen other charges. But the case stayed with me long after it was closed. The idea that someone could just insert themselves into a family's life, could force people to live a lie for months, was deeply disturbing. And the fact that it had gone on for so long that nobody had noticed anything wrong made me realize how easily people can disappear into plain sight. It also made me think about all the other families I'd encountered over the years, all the houses I'd visited where everything seemed normal on the surface. How many of them were hiding secrets? How many were living lies they were too afraid to expose? The scariest thing about David Crenshaw wasn't that he was obviously dangerous or mentally ill. It was that he seemed so normal, so reasonable. He'd convinced himself that what he was doing was acceptable, that he had a right to take over someone else's life. And if a 6-year-old girl hadn't been brave enough to dial 911, he might have gotten away with it indefinitely. That case taught me that sometimes the most ordinary-looking situations are the most dangerous ones, and that the line between normal and deeply disturbed can be much thinner than any of us want to believe. The 6th case was the one that made me decide to retire. After 32 years on the force, I thought I'd developed some kind of immunity to the worst things people could do to each other. I was wrong. This call came in on a Tuesday morning in November, during what should have been the quiet hours when most people are at work or school, and the city settles into its daytime rhythm. But something about the way Maria's voice crackled over the radio told me this wasn't going to be routine. Unit 7, we've got a hang-up at 1542 Maple Grove Lane. Callers stayed on the line for approximately 12 minutes. Dispatcher reports hearing what sounded like multiple voices, possibly arguing, and what might have been crying in the background. The line went dead suddenly, like someone pulled the phone cord from the wall. No response to multiple callback attempts. Maple Grove Lane was in Willowbrook, one of those suburban developments that had sprung up in the 90s when the economy was booming and families were moving out of the city centers. It was the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' names and children played in cul-de-sacs until streetlights came on. 1542 was a large Tudor-style house with a 3-car garage and a lawn that looked like it had been manicured with scissors. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed several things that seemed off. There were 3 cars parked there: a BMW sedan, a Honda Civic, and an older pickup truck, but they were arranged in a way that suggested they'd been moved hastily. The BMW was parked at an angle, like someone had pulled in quickly without taking time to straighten it. The front door of the house was slightly ajar, which was unusual for a November morning when the temperature was in the 40s. I approached the front door and could immediately hear voices from inside. Not conversation, arguing. A man's voice, loud and aggressive, and what sounded like at least 2 people responding, their voices higher-pitched and distressed. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was angry, and someone else was scared. I rang the doorbell, and the arguing stopped immediately. Complete silence, like someone had just turned off a radio. I waited about 30 seconds, then rang again and knocked. Police department. We received a call from this address. I heard whispered conversation, urgent and hurried. Then footsteps approaching the door. It opened about 6 inches, held by a security chain, and a woman's face appeared in the gap. She was maybe 45, with blonde hair that looked like it had been hastily arranged, and there was something wrong with the left side of her face. Swelling, maybe, or a bruise that makeup couldn't quite cover. "Officer, I'm sorry, but there's been a mistake. We didn't call anyone." "Ma'am, we definitely received a 911 call from this number." The call stayed open for several minutes. It must have been a malfunction. Sometimes our phone acts up. I could hear voices again from somewhere deeper in the house. Quieter now, but still tense. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Carol." Carol Patterson. Mrs. Patterson, is your husband home? She hesitated. No, he's at work. But I could clearly hear a man's voice from inside the house, speaking in low, urgent tones. Ma'am, I can hear a man talking inside. If your husband isn't home, who is that? Her face went even paler. That's our son. He's visiting for the week. How old is your son? 28. Mrs. Patterson, are you safe? Is anyone in the house threatening you or hurting you? No, everything's fine, really. We just had a small disagreement about family matters. But even as she said it, I could see her eyes darting back into the house, like she was afraid of being overheard. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open the door so I can verify that everyone's safe. I can't do that right now. We're not dressed appropriately for company. Mrs. Patterson, someone in this house called 911. That means someone felt they were in danger. I need to make sure everyone's okay. I heard the man's voice again, closer to the door now. Carol, who is that? It's a police officer, honey. He says someone called 911. Tell him it was a mistake and send him away. There was something about the man's tone that made my hand move instinctively toward my weapon. It wasn't the voice of a son talking to his mother. It was the voice of someone giving orders and expecting them to be obeyed. Mrs. Patterson, I need to speak with the man inside. He's busy right now. Maybe you could come back later. Ma'am, I'm not leaving until I verify that everyone in this house is safe. The door closed, and I heard urgent, whispered conversation. I could make out some of the words now. What did you tell them? Nothing, I swear. If you're lying, I'm not lying, please. The door opened again, this time without the security chain. A man appeared beside Mrs. Patterson. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair and the kind of build that suggested he worked out regularly. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, and he had the kind of eyes that seemed to be constantly calculating, assessing threats. Officer, I'm sorry about the confusion. I'm David Patterson, Carol's son. We were having a family discussion that got a little heated, and my mother accidentally bumped the phone off the hook. Mr. Patterson, the 911 call lasted 12 minutes. That's a long time for an accidental dial. We have an old phone system. Sometimes when the receiver gets knocked off, it takes a while for the line to disconnect. It was possible, I supposed, but something about his explanation felt rehearsed. Can I see some identification, Mr. Patterson? Of course. He reached for his wallet and handed me his driver's license. The name matched what he'd told me, but the address was in California, not local. You're visiting from California? That's right. I'm here for about a week, helping my mother with some family business. What kind of business? He glanced at Mrs. Patterson before answering. My father passed away recently. We're going through his affairs, sorting out the estate. I'm sorry for your loss. When did he pass away? About a month ago. Mrs. Patterson was standing very still, very quiet, but I could see tears forming in her eyes. Mrs. Patterson, are you okay? She nodded, but didn't speak. Can you tell me about your husband's death? He had a heart attack, very sudden. Was he ill before that? David Patterson answered, before his mother could speak. He'd been having chest pains for a few weeks, but he refused to see a doctor. You know how stubborn older men can be. Something about the way he kept answering for his mother was bothering me. In my experience, when someone consistently speaks for another person, it usually means they're trying to control the narrative. Mr. Patterson, where in California do you live? Los Angeles. I'm in construction. Oh, and you drove here from Los Angeles? Flew. Rented a car at the airport. I looked at the pickup truck in the driveway. It had local plates and looked like it had been there for a while. Which car is the rental? He followed my gaze. The Honda. The truck belongs to my mother. And the BMW? That was my father's car. I heard a sound from inside the house. A door closing, maybe, or something being moved around. Is there anyone else in the house? No, just us, David said. But Mrs. Patterson's eyes flickered toward the interior of the house when he said it, like she was afraid he was wrong. Mrs. Patterson, is there anyone else here? She looked at her son, then back at me. No, just David and me. Can I come inside and take a look around? Just to make sure everything's secure? I don't think that's necessary, David said. As you can see, we're both fine. Sir, someone in this house called 911. Standard procedure is for me to verify the safety of everyone on the premises. Officer, with all due respect, this is a private residence. Unless you have a warrant. Mr. Patterson, I don't need a warrant to conduct a welfare check. Someone called for help, and I'm going to make sure they don't need it. He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him thinking, weighing his options. Of course, he said finally. We have nothing to hide. He stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The foyer was elegant, with hardwood floors and expensive-looking furniture. But there were signs that something was wrong. A lamp was lying on its side on a side table, and there were scuff marks on the floor that looked recent. What happened to the lamp? I bumped into the table earlier, Mrs. Patterson said quickly. Clumsy of me. But the scuff marks on the floor suggested more than someone accidentally bumping into furniture. They looked like the kind of marks you'd see if there had been a struggle. Mrs. Patterson, can you show me where the phone is that made the 911 call? She led me into the kitchen. There was a cordless phone sitting in its charger on the counter, but next to it was an old rotary phone with the cord pulled out of the wall jack. This is the phone that got knocked off the hook. Yes, David said. Like I told you, we have an old system. But the cord hadn't just been pulled out. It looked like it had been yanked out forcefully, hard enough to damage the plastic connector. I was starting to get a very bad feeling about this situation. The evidence suggested there had been some kind of physical altercation in the house, but both David and Mrs. Patterson were insisting everything was fine. Can I see the rest of the house? Of course, David said, though I should warn you, we've been going through my father's things, so it's a bit of a mess. He led me through the living room, which looked like someone had been searching through it systematically. Books were pulled off shelves, cushions were displaced, and there were boxes scattered around that appeared to have been hastily packed. You're packing up your father's belongings? That's right. My mother can't bear to have his things around. But Mrs. Patterson's expression suggested otherwise. She was looking around the room like she was seeing the destruction for the first time. Mrs. Patterson, is this how you wanted your husband's things handled? She opened her mouth to answer, but David spoke first. It's been very difficult for her. The grief makes it hard to think clearly sometimes. I was becoming more and more convinced that something was seriously wrong here. David Patterson was controlling every aspect of the conversation, answering questions directed at his mother, and explaining away evidence that suggested violence had occurred in the house. Mr. Patterson, can I see your plane ticket from your flight from Los Angeles? I threw it away. I don't usually keep travel documents after I arrive. What about your rental car agreement? That's in the car. Do you really need to see it? Yes, I do. He looked annoyed but nodded. Fine, let me go get it. He left the room, and as soon as he was gone, Mrs. Patterson grabbed my arm. Officer, she whispered urgently, he's not my son. What? David is dead. My son David died in a car accident 3 years ago. I don't know who this man is. I felt my blood run cold. How long has he been here? 4 days. He showed up Sunday night, said he was David, said he'd come home to help with his father's funeral arrangements. But my husband isn't dead. This man, he did something to Robert. I don't know what, but Robert hasn't come home since this man arrived. Why didn't you call the police? I tried. That's what the 911 call was, but he caught me and pulled the phone out of the wall. I heard footsteps returning. Mrs. Patterson, stay close to me. David reappeared with a piece of paper in his hand. Here's the rental agreement, he said, handing it to me. I looked at it. It was indeed a rental car agreement, but it was for the BMW in the driveway, not the Honda. And it was dated 6 months ago, not recent. Mr. Patterson, this is for the BMW, and it's 6 months old. I must have grabbed the wrong paper. The Honda agreement must be in my luggage upstairs. Sir, I need you to step over here and put your hands where I can see them. What? Why? Mrs. Patterson has told me some very concerning things. I need to verify your identity. His demeanor changed immediately. The fake concern, the polite cooperation, it all fell away, replaced by something much more dangerous. That old bitch doesn't know what she's talking about. The grief has made her confused, paranoid. Sir, hands where I can see them. He looked around the room, and I could see him calculating his options. The front door was behind him, but I was between him and Mrs. Patterson. Officer, you're making a big mistake. I'm her son. I'm here to help her. If that's true, then you won't mind coming to the station for further verification. I'm not going anywhere with you. I drew my weapon. Sir, put your hands up and turn around. Instead, he lunged toward Mrs. Patterson. I don't know what he was planning to do, grab her as a hostage, hurt her to create a distraction, but I couldn't let him reach her. I tackled him before he could get to her, and we both went down hard on the hardwood floor. He was strong, stronger than I'd expected, and he fought like someone who had nothing to lose. We struggled for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds before I managed to get him in handcuffs. Mrs. Patterson, are you okay? She was pressed against the wall, shaking, but nodded. I'm okay. But officer, what about Robert? What about my husband? We're going to find him. Can you tell me exactly what happened when this man first arrived? He knocked on the door Sunday night around 9 o'clock. Said he was David, said he'd heard about his father's death and had come home for the funeral. But there was no funeral. Robert isn't dead, he's just gone. I radioed for backup and an ambulance. We needed to search the house thoroughly, and Mrs. Patterson needed medical attention for the injuries I could now see more clearly. Bruises on her arms, a cut on her lip that had been concealed by makeup. Mrs. Patterson, did this man hurt you? He made me call Robert's work and tell them he was sick. Then he made me call Robert's friends and family and tell them we were going out of town for a few days. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd kill me and Robert both. Where do you think your husband is? I don't know. This man won't tell me. He just keeps saying Robert is safe as long as I do what he says. The man on the floor, whoever he really was conscious but not talking. He glared at me with the kind of hatred that suggested he was culpable of much worse than what we'd already seen. Backup arrived within 10 minutes, followed by detectives and a crime scene team. The search of the house revealed evidence of a violent struggle in the master bedroom. Blood on the carpet that had been hastily cleaned, signs that someone had been dragged across the floor. In the basement, we found more disturbing evidence. Ropes, duct tape, and what looked like a makeshift holding area behind some storage boxes. There was blood down there, too, and personal belongings that Mrs. Patterson identified as her husband's. The investigation revealed that the man's real name was Marcus Webb, and he had an extensive criminal history including robbery, assault, and kidnapping. He'd been targeting elderly couples, posing as their adult children to gain entry to their homes, then robbing them, and sometimes worse. He'd been watching the Patterson family for weeks, learning about their real son, David's death, their daily routines, their financial situation. When he made his move, he'd overpowered Robert Patterson in the garage as he was coming home from work, then convinced Carol that he was her dead son come home to help with his father's funeral. We never found Robert Patterson's body, despite extensive searches of the area. Marcus Webb was eventually convicted of kidnapping and murder, but he never revealed what he'd done with Robert or where he'd disposed of the body. Mrs. Patterson had to live with not knowing what had happened to her husband, not being able to give him a proper burial. The case haunted me for months afterward. The idea that someone could study a family so carefully, learn their most painful secrets, and then use that knowledge to infiltrate their lives was deeply disturbing. Marcus Webb had known about David's death, about the family's grief, about their financial situation, about their daily routines. He'd used all of that information to create a perfect disguise. But what bothered me most was how easily it had worked. If Mrs. Patterson hadn't been brave enough to make that 911 call, if she hadn't been quick enough to tell me the truth when he left the room, Marcus Webb might have succeeded completely. He would have robbed them, killed them both, and disappeared with a new identity and enough money to start his operation all over again somewhere else. The case made me realize how vulnerable we all are to people who are willing to study us, to learn our weaknesses and exploit them. Most of us live our lives assuming that the people who claim to be our friends, our family members, our service providers are who they say they are. We don't question a son who comes home for his father's funeral, or a grandson who visits his grandparents, or a utility worker who needs to check the meter. But Marcus Webb proved that assumption can be deadly. He'd built his entire criminal career on understanding that people want to trust, want to believe that someone claiming to be family is telling the truth. He'd learned to mimic grief, to fake concern, to project exactly the kind of emotions that would make people lower their guard. That was my last major case before I retired. After 32 years of seeing the worst things people could do to each other, Marcus Webb was the one who finally broke me. Not because of the violence, though that was horrible enough, but because of the calculation behind it, the cold-blooded way he'd studied a grieving family and decided to use their pain against them. I realized that night that I didn't have the emotional strength to keep doing this job. Every 9/11 hang-up call from then on would make me wonder if I was walking into another Marcus Webb situation. Every family that seemed normal on the surface would make me question whether they really were who they claimed to be. So I retired. 32 years was enough. I'd seen enough deception, enough cruelty, enough people who were willing to destroy innocent lives for money or power or just because they could. I was done trying to protect people from monsters who looked just like the people they were supposed to trust. But even now, years later, I still think about Mrs. Patterson. I hope she found some peace, some way to move on from losing both her husband and her sense of safety in her own home. I hope she learned to trust again, to believe that not everyone who claims to care about her is lying. And I think about all the other families out there living their lives, assuming they're safe, not knowing that someone might be watching them, studying them, learning their vulnerabilities. Because Marcus Webb wasn't unique. There are others like him out there, patient and smart and willing to spend weeks or months preparing the perfect deception. That's the thing about being a police officer for 32 years. You learn that the real monsters aren't the ones who look obviously dangerous. They're the ones who look exactly like the people you're supposed to trust most. The seventh and final case was the one that still wakes me up at night, 15 years after I hung up my badge for the last time. It came in during my very last week on the force, when I was already mentally checked out, already thinking about fishing trips and quiet mornings with nothing more dangerous than reading the newspaper. I should have known that the job wasn't going to let me go that easily. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night in December. Maria's voice over the radio had an edge I'd never heard before, something that made me sit up straighter in the patrol car and turn up the volume. Unit 4, we need you at 3891 Oak Ridge Avenue immediately. We've had multiple hang-up calls from this address over the past 6 hours. 7 calls total, each lasting between 2 and 15 minutes. Dispatcher reports hearing what sounds like children crying, adult voices arguing, and what might be gunshots in the background of the most recent call. No response to any callback attempts. Address is registered to a family named Morrison. David Morrison, age 34, Lisa Morrison, age 31, and 3 children ages 5, 7, and 9. Oak Ridge Avenue was in Bentwood Heights, the most expensive part of our jurisdiction. It was where doctors and lawyers and successful business owners lived in houses that cost more than most people made in 5 years. It was the kind of neighborhood where domestic disputes got handled quietly, where people paid to keep their problems out of the newspaper, where a police car in the driveway was considered a social embarrassment. 3891 was a massive, colonial house set back from the road behind a wrought iron gate that was standing open. The driveway curved up to a circular courtyard in front of the house, and there were 4 cars parked there. 2 expensive sedans, an SUV, and a van that looked out of place among the luxury vehicles. Every light in the house seemed to be on, casting a harsh glow across the manicured lawn and making the whole place look like it was on fire from within. I parked behind the van and approached the front door. Before I could knock, I could hear what Maria had described. Voices, lots of them, coming from multiple rooms. Adults talking urgently, children crying, and underneath it all, a sound that made my blood run cold. Someone was screaming. Not crying, not shouting, but the kind of raw, desperate screaming that comes from someone in unimaginable pain. I hammered on the door with my flashlight. "Police department, open the door now." The screaming stopped, but the other voices continued. I could hear footsteps running through the house, doors slamming, and what sounded like furniture being moved around. "This is the police. Open this door immediately," a man's voice answered from somewhere inside. "Everything's fine, officer." Just a family gathering that got a little loud. But everything was clearly not fine. I could still hear children crying, and now I could make out words from some of the adult conversations. "Where did you put it?" I don't know. "Check the basement again." What if someone finds out? I tried the door handle. It was locked. But as I was reaching for my radio to call for backup, the door suddenly swung open. A man stood there, maybe 40, wearing an expensive suit that was wrinkled and stained with something dark. His face was flushed, and there was sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold December night. "Officer, thank you for coming, but as I said, everything's under control here." "Sir, what's your name?" "David Morrison." "This is my house." But something was wrong with his eyes. They were too wide, too bright, like someone who was running on adrenaline and desperation. "Mr. Morrison, we've received 7 911 calls from this address tonight. Someone in this house has been trying to call for help." "Those were accidents. My kids were playing with the phone. You know how kids are." I could still hear voices from inside the house, and one of them was definitely not a child. It was a woman, and she was pleading, "Please, I have children. Please don't do this. Mr. Morrison, I need to come inside." "I'm afraid that's not possible. We're having a private family matter and—" "Sir, step aside or I'll arrest you for obstruction." He looked back into the house and I could see him calculating something. Then he stepped aside, but he stayed close to the door like he was ready to slam it shut if necessary. The interior of the house was chaos. The elegant foyer was littered with papers, overturned furniture, and what looked like the contents of several suitcases. There were people moving around in multiple rooms. I could see at least 4 adults and hear children's voices from upstairs. "Mr. Morrison, who else is in the house?" "Just family. My wife, my children, my brother and his family. We're having an early Christmas gathering." But the woman I could hear pleading didn't sound like she was at a family Christmas party. She sounded terrified. "I need to see everyone who's in this house." "Officer, this really isn't necessary. As I said, it's just a family gathering that got a little emotional." I walked further into the house, and what I saw made me draw my weapon. In the living room, there were 3 adults sitting on the floor with their hands zip-tied behind their backs. A woman in her 30s was crying silently, blood running from her nose. A man about the same age was unconscious, his head lolling to one side. An elderly woman was rocking back and forth, mumbling something I couldn't understand. "Mr. Morrison, what the hell is going on here?" But he was already moving, reaching for something under his jacket. I had my weapon trained on him before he could draw whatever he was going for. "Hands where I can see them, now." "Officer, you don't understand the situation here." "Then explain it to me." Another man appeared from the kitchen, and this one was definitely armed. He had a pistol in his hand, but he wasn't pointing it at me. He was pointing it at the people on the floor. "David, what are you doing? Get rid of him." I'm trying, but he won't leave. I radioed for backup, keeping my weapon trained on both men. "Unit 4, I need immediate backup at 3891 Oak Ridge Avenue. Multiple hostages, at least 2 armed suspects." "Roger, Unit 4, all available units responding." The second man, the one with the gun, looked at David Morrison with disgust. This wasn't part of the plan. "I know, but what was I supposed to do? He was going to come in anyway. You should have handled it better." I could hear children crying upstairs, and the sound was getting louder. Someone up there was very scared. "Both of you, drop your weapons and get on the ground." "Officer," David Morrison said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. These people, they're not victims, they're criminals. We caught them breaking into our house. With their hands zip-tied, while you're holding guns on them? We had to restrain them until the police arrived." But the woman on the floor was shaking her head frantically. "That's not true," she managed to say through her tears. "They broke into our house. They killed my husband." "Shut up," the armed man said, waving his gun at her. The pieces were starting to come together in my mind, and the picture they formed was horrifying. These weren't homeowners who had caught burglars. These were the burglars, and they had invaded someone else's house, murdered the husband, and were holding the family hostage. "Where are the children?" I asked. "Safe," David Morrison said. "They're upstairs, safe." But I could hear them crying, could hear adult voices trying to calm them down, and one of those adult voices was familiar. It was the same woman who had been pleading earlier. "I'm going upstairs to check on the children." "No, you're not," the armed man said, raising his pistol toward me. I had about 2 seconds to make a decision. I could wait for backup, try to negotiate, hope that these men would see reason. Or I could act now, while I still had some element of surprise. I chose to act. 2 shots, center mass, to the man with the gun. He went down immediately. David Morrison reached for his weapon again, but I was faster. Another 2 shots, and he crumpled next to his partner. The house went completely silent except for the children crying upstairs. I rushed to the people on the floor, checking their restraints, making sure they were okay. "How many children are upstairs?" I asked the woman. "3. My 3 children. There's a woman up there too. She's been trying to keep them calm." "Anyone else in the house?" "I don't know. These men, there were 4 of them originally. I don't know where the other 2 are." I heard sirens approaching. Backup was almost here, but I couldn't wait to check on the children. If there were 2 more armed men in the house, those kids were in immediate danger. I climbed the stairs, weapon drawn, listening carefully for any sound that might indicate where the remaining suspects were. The children's crying was coming from a room at the end of the hall, and I could hear a woman's voice trying to soothe them. The first 2 bedrooms I checked were empty, but they'd been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, mattresses overturned, clothes scattered everywhere. These men had been searching for something. The 3rd bedroom was where I found them. 2 more men, both armed, standing over a woman who was huddled in a corner with 3 children clinging to her. The children looked like they'd been crying for hours. Their faces were red and streaked with tears, and they were shaking with terror. "Police, drop your weapons." Both men spun toward me, raising their guns. I fired before they could get a clean shot, dropping the first one immediately. The second one got off a round that splintered the door frame next to my head before I put him down too. The woman and children were screaming now, but they weren't hurt. I holstered my weapon and approached them slowly, hands visible. "It's okay, I'm a police officer. You're safe now." The woman looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Are they dead? All of them?" "The ones in the house are. Ma'am, what's your name?" "Sarah Chen. These are my children, Amy, Michael, and Kevin." "Is this your house?" "Yes, those men. They broke in around dinner time. They killed my husband when he tried to fight them off. They've been holding us here for hours, searching for something." "What were they looking for?" "I don't know. They kept asking about money, about where David kept his safe, about bank accounts. But we don't have anything like what they were talking about." Backup arrived, and within minutes the house was full of police officers, paramedics, and crime scene investigators. The 4 dead men were identified as members of a home invasion crew that had been targeting wealthy families across 3 states. They would study their victims for weeks, learning their routines, their financial situations, their family structures. Then they would strike when the family was most vulnerable. But this time, something had gone wrong. The family they'd targeted, the Chens, weren't as wealthy as the criminals had believed. David Chen wasn't a drug dealer or money launderer. He was just a successful accountant who had worked hard to provide a nice life for his family. The criminals had expected to find large amounts of cash or drugs, but instead they'd found a normal family with normal amounts of money. When they realized their mistake, they'd decided to hold the family hostage while they figured out their next move. That's when the 911 calls had started. Sarah Chen had managed to dial 911 multiple times throughout the evening, but the criminals had caught her each time and hung up before she could speak. The investigation revealed that the 4 men had been responsible for at least 12 similar home invasions over the past 2 years. In most cases, they'd left no witnesses. The Chen family had survived only because David Chen had hidden his family in a panic room when the invasion started, and because Sarah Chen had been brave enough to keep trying to call for help, even when she knew it might get her killed. David Chen's body was found in the garage. He'd been shot 3 times while trying to protect his family. He'd bought them enough time to hide, but it had cost him his life. The case closed quickly. 4 dead suspects, clear evidence of home invasion and murder, a surviving family that could testify about what had happened. But something about it bothered me. something I couldn't put my finger until weeks later when I was cleaning out my desk. I found the initial report from that night, and as I read through it, I realized what had been nagging at me. The house number. 3891 Oak Ridge Avenue. I'd been to that address before, years earlier, on another 911 hang-up call. I pulled the old file and read through it, trying to call her son, but kept dialing 911 instead. Her husband had been taking care of her, trying to keep her confusion from becoming a public matter. It had been a sad case, an old man watching his wife slip away from him day by day. But the thing that made my blood run cold was the name. David Morrison. The same name as the man who had answered the door on my final case, the man who claimed to be the homeowner, but was actually one of the home invaders. I did some research and found that David Morrison, the real David Morrison, the elderly man, had died in a nursing home 3 years after my first visit to that house. His wife had died 6 months later. The house had been sold to the Chen family. Somehow, one of the home invaders had known about the Morrison family, had known their names and enough of their history to pose as their son when I arrived. It suggested a level of preparation and research that went far beyond what typical home invasion crews usually did. But I never got the chance to investigate further. I retired the following week, as planned, and turned the case over to the detectives. As far as I know, they never figured out the connection between the Morrison family and the home invaders. But it haunts me. The idea that these criminals had been planning their attack for so long, had researched the property so thoroughly, that they knew about families who had lived there years before. It suggests they had access to information that most criminals don't have. Police records, maybe, or real estate files, or hospital records. It makes me wonder how many other crimes have connections that we never see, patterns that cross decades and link seemingly unrelated cases. How many times have I responded to calls without realizing that I was seeing the same people, the same addresses, the same patterns of violence playing out across years or even generations? That's what 32 years of police work teaches you, that nothing happens in isolation. Every crime, every call, every act of violence is connected to something else. Sometimes in ways that are obvious, sometimes in ways that only become clear years later when you have the perspective to see the bigger picture. The Chen family survived, physically at least. Sarah Chen and her 3 children moved away from our city, started new lives somewhere else. I hope they found peace, hope the children were able to recover from what they witnessed that night. But I know that kind of trauma leaves marks that never fully heal. And I know that somewhere out there, there are other home invasion crews studying other families, learning their routines, their weaknesses, their secrets. Planning attacks that might not happen for months or years, but that will be devastating when they do. That's why I couldn't stay on the job any longer. Not because of the violence. I'd seen plenty of violence over the years. But because of the calculation behind it, the cold-blooded planning that went into destroying innocent lives. The idea that criminals could study a family for years, could learn everything about their hopes and fears and daily routines, and then use that knowledge to destroy them. After 32 years, I'd seen enough of the darkness that people are capable of. I was ready to spend whatever time I had left trying to forget it, trying to believe that most people are good, that most families are safe, that most 911 calls are just accidents or misunderstandings. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I still think about all the hang-up calls I never solved, all the voices I heard in the background that I couldn't quite identify, all the houses where I accepted the first explanation I was given and walked away, not knowing what was really happening behind those closed doors. I think about the calls that are coming in right now as I write this, the dispatchers who are hearing breathing on the other end of the line, the officers who are driving to addresses where someone is waiting for help that might never come. And I wonder, how many monsters are out there right now, wearing the faces of people we're supposed to trust? How many families are living with secrets they're too afraid to expose? How many children are lying awake in the dark, listening to sounds they don't understand, waiting for someone to notice that something is wrong? The phone calls never really stop. Even after you retire, even after you turn in your badge and try to forget, you still hear them. Late at night, when the world is quiet and your defenses are down, you still hear that sound. The sound of someone breathing on the other end of the line, someone who needs help but can't say the words, someone who is running out of time. That's the curse of being a cop for 32 years. You learn that the silence between the words is often more important than the words themselves. And once you learn to hear that silence, you can never stop listening for it.